And the board is now out of recess. In accordance with, before we begin our reports and discussions today, trustees, we do. I am asking both the board and the administration to be mindful of the times we've set for each section. In accordance with policy BE local, if I need to extend the time, I will assess where we are in the discussion and adjust the time accordingly. All trustees will be provided an equal opportunity to speak. Trustees, we are now on agenda item number 5, performance monitoring. We'll begin with item 5A, Student Career Certifications Report.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Miles, I'm calling everybody trustee today.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. We have done a great job in increasing industry certified certifications, industry approved certifications that our students receive, and she's here to talk about that performance.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to report on certifications earned by our students in the year 2013-14. We in College and Career Readiness and the Career Education and Workforce Partnerships Department, which is charged with managing this program, are focused on the Destination 2020 goals that our students be college and career ready. In order to do that, one of our goals is to increase the number of industry recognized certifications that our students earn. These kinds of certifications actually earn our students jobs at higher pay than they would have without these certifications, and they align with workforce living wage careers, as well as the 132 career pathways that the district currently has. Began an expansion plan that we strategically will continue to increase the number of industry recognized certifications earned. In 2013-14, 1,442 students earned 1,683 career certifications. The students earned 1 certification. A few earned 5 and 6 certifications. Those certifications were in Microsoft Office Specialist, where you can earn a number of certifications in a variety of Microsoft Office products. I've included a breakdown over a 5-year period to show for you the increase in certifications that we concentrated on in this past year. There's an increase from 780 certifications total earned in 2012-13, an increase of 903 certifications to a total number of 1,683. If you notice that we have put this in 4 different basic pots. The first, business and computing, 38% of the certifications earned in 2013-14, or 646, were in this area. A lot of these are in Microsoft Office, but as well some of the other programs that are noted here, including AutoCAD, A+, Adobe InDesign, and other programs. In the area of health and safety, we have been focusing on building, as many of you know, health science programs in the district, and we increased from 140 to 404, representing 24% of total certifications last year. And in hospitality and tourism, which is another area that we're expanding, 482 total, 29% of the total for 2013-14. And then in the trades, we have certifications in automotive tech, interior design, cosmetology, and other areas. 151 total, or 9%, making up the total for last year. And then I've included, and I apologize for the size of this, but I tried to put a lot of information on here to show you the trustee district, the schools, the certifications earned by school, the total number passing, which by the way was just under 73% of students passing their certification exams. We do not have complete information from the schools from last year that we will get this year, but for those 37% that reported gender, you have the passing rate for males at 68% and for females at 81%. We do not have student demographic data tied into this at this point in time. And then you see the breakdown by school of the certifications, the number of certifications that students earned. And that is our overall report.
Turn it over to trustees. Trustee Moran.
A couple of questions. One, the slide 2 slides before this, I was unclear. Maybe 3 slides before this, I was unclear whether that indicated students who had passed those exams or students who had just taken those exams.
These are students who have passed the exams.
The second question is outcomes tracking beyond certification. Are we tracking the students after they receive the certification to determine whether or not they're employed in this field?
That is a very good question, and we are currently working with the Texas Workforce Commission to execute a data sharing agreement so that we can follow students in the state of Texas. That is the way that is standard operating procedure throughout the country in terms of tracking those outcomes. Currently, as you know, we only track college enrollment, which does include, by the way, more certifications than can be earned by these students, and that information we gather from National Student Clearinghouse.
Yeah?
The ServSafe food handler program, does that actually provide a license or just their certificate?
Certifications, not a license.
Looked into providing license or subsidizing?
Absolutely. As I said earlier, this is just the first year of a program where we want to expand these certifications. There are nearly 300 different certifications that our students can earn, so you understand this is just a small section of them. And we really want to expand it so that we're able to provide certifications that lead to even higher wages. If I could provide just one quick example. We do have some students who earn a CNA, Certified Nursing Assistant, and at Townview, a few students earned a PCT, Patient Care Technician certification. PCT is on the way to a living wage, where CNA is not, but it's a pathway to PCT. So we really are looking in future years about moving these into lower grade levels, and so that students, by the time they're in junior and senior year, can be earning higher levels of certifications and or licensures, as you're commenting on. And that strategically is the way we're looking at building this program.
In certification earned, do we have total number of students in each program at the school? That it says total number passing, but do we have a column to see total number in program?
No, I can add that back in, but in the interest of space, that's why I just left percent passing, but I can add it back in.
Yeah, just to look at, you know, if you have the law enforcement at Sunset, I see 24 students passed, but it'd be curious to know how many are in that particular program. That I saw 0 for Hillcrest. We had 0 students pass. The Microsoft Office specialist. So do we know how many may be in there?
I'm happy to send that spreadsheet that shows it. I just hit it on this, so.
But I see a lot of them against Melina's service food handling. We had 115, and 4 in Adobe Visual. In their certification, but it would be curious to compare that number to how many are actually in there, and what do we, if they flunk it, how many times are they taking the exam to get their certification? Is it one time try, or?
Most of these certifications are actually delivered the end of second semester of their school year. So typically, they're going to have one opportunity to take it, depending on the exam. It depends on the exam. All of the exams are actually different in terms of the qualifications and the time period that it takes, and some of them require different things than just a test. There are actual things that have to be accomplished in order to earn the certification.
We pay for the certification?
Yes, we do.
We pay for all of them?
Yes.
So if they flunk it that one time, do they get an opportunity the next year to?
If they're still in school, yes. Yes, absolutely.
Majority seniors?
We actually do not have complete information on grade level at this time. Many of them are juniors and seniors. Most of them are juniors and seniors.
Because I see like at WT White, we had one person that passed the test. So just be curious to know how many are actually in it and how we are helping the students to take the test and pass it.
In that case, there was only one student who took the exam.
Or, what was his name? Right here. So only one student took the exam. Just be curious to know how many are actually and not going forward to get their certification. Okay, I look forward to
Thank you, Trustee Nuttall. Did you have the floor next, Trustee Foreman? Oh,
Well, actually, we were going around the horseshoe, so Trustee
would you mind if we go around the horseshoe? Okay, thank you. Trustee Bingham.
Could you come back to me, because I was out of the room at the time, and so that'll give me some moments to catch up and try to articulate clearly what's on my mind.
Anyone ate the Reese's Pieces, I see it.
And I can eat the Reese's peanut butter
Trustee
cup.
Jones.
Thank you. I can't say enough good things about this area of focus for the district as we move toward 21st century education standards, workforce standards, higher ed standards. This is our future in front of us, and I'm so pleased that over the last 2 years, this has been an area of focus, been an area of proactive pursuit. Clearly, we'd like to see all of the schools that could be covered, and I know that's part of the plan right now. So that is something we do need to continue to stay focused. I want to give a specific shout out to you, Dr. Johnson, and also to you, Dr. Smisko. This is, just like early childhood is a critical part of things we must get right. This is another major priority from where I'm sitting and from where the entirety of our Texas workforce economy is sitting. And for us to train in areas of high wage or potentially high wage skills that can translate into so many facets of career. And I think we're looking at a different moment in time. People think of trade as being simple. It's not. It is something today that is highly sophisticated. It requires that students have the tools of the trade, the exposure, the opportunity to work in the trade, and I also want to call out the programs we're doing at Kimball and others where students get workforce experience as they're training. So all I can say is more. Just to keep expanding to where all of our kids have a very strong distribution of possibilities for these different areas within their comprehensive campuses. It is an area I believe the district should continue to invest heavily. And I also want to thank the Chamber for their support in working very closely with the district, with our employers, and with the broader part of the workforce in really being proactive in making this happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Jones. Trustee Foreman?
I have a couple of questions. As I look at the spreadsheet, clearly there are only 12 certificates in District 6. Although the Kimball School was mentioned, there are no certificates there. And so as a District 6 representative, what I'm looking at is that most of these certificate programs are in current magnet schools, which clearly already have an advantage. And for me, it would be extremely important to make sure that these roll out to the comprehensive schools so that the children will have an opportunity to gain that knowledge and to be able to get certificates. That's number one. Number two is, are there other trades that are being taught in the schools that are not certificate programs, i.e. welding, air conditioning repair, cosmetology, those kinds of things? So, are there?
Yes. If I could answer the first part of your question,
Sure,
we
you
agree
may.
with you completely, and this year have budgeted over $197,000 for certification exams so that we can expand them into more into schools. This is the first year that we've been able to proactively budget to meet the same goals that you are articulating in terms of expanding certifications to all our comprehensive schools. To the second question, that we do have trade programs in a report that I'm making with the Destination 2020 plan. I actually have included in that the programs that are on each and every campus. For instance, though, however, welding is, that program of welding is only available actually at Seagoville currently. We just put in 6 new welding labs this summer. We have trades scattered at different programs across the district, some in Wilmer Hutchins, Skyline, Seagoville, and others, and that is an area of that we have planned for huge expansion in the district. There is tremendous growth in logistics, tremendous growth in trades. We have no current plumbing programs in the district that we're looking to expand. We completely agree with you.
Just an observation, as you roll out the certification or the certificate programs, I think for me, as one trustee, it would be really good to know the other programs that are out there that are not certification programs, because if I just took this at face value, I would be thinking that we're not doing enough. But if I look at the programs that are out there that are not listed on here, I would know that we were doing more. So there has to be some combining the two programs so that we get a good understanding of what's going on.
If I may make a really quick comment, Trustee Foreman, you are correct. So for instance, in Kimball, as you well know, Kimball is our one distinguished National Academy Foundation program. And while this is a report on certifications, it's not on internships. And those students just do a spectacular job on real-world paid internships, which is even more important than, or as important, if not more important, than certifications.
Thank you, Trustee Foreman, Trustee Bingham, and then Trustee Cowan.
Yeah. I agree with Joyce. I think if I looked at this list, I would think very limited. So I think we need to have a more robust list. It seems like we do a pendulum swing in education. It's like, okay, everybody needs to go to college, and then we swing it the other way. Somehow we've got to get the nice, comfortable in between. Every child does not want to go to college. They don't have that desire. And if we can provide them with a way to make a great income, I think we need to do so. I'm noticing on this, we've got that inland port down in Wilmer Hutchins it is going to be growing. And yet the two schools that are closest to it, Wilmer and Sigaville, there's nothing there for transportation. And there's a lot more to transportation than just driving getting a CDL license. To me, that would be the perfect two places to beef it up. Do I know anything about it? Absolutely not, but I know there's got to be an expert somewhere. Sigaville did get a welding program this summer, but they also have, Sigaville got a radio station. So now they're one of the only schools in Dallas ISD that is partnering with the city of Sigaville, or actually with the Sigaville Chamber. They're gonna get me on this one. The Sigaville Chamber of Commerce's radio station. So our kids they're able to train in communications to possibly have a job in communications, which I think that's great. I'm looking at cosmetology. We only had 20 folks who got a cosmetology certification, and I'm thinking right now one of our girls at our church, now she did not go to Dallas ISD, let me clarify that. She went to Mesquite that has a cosmetology program, but she didn't do it in high school. She wasn't counseled to do that. And now she's paying $18,000 to get her beautification license. And it's like, we need to somehow get these programs, beef it up, but we also need to have the counseling in place that can steer the kids in the right pathway. And I've said this often before, I come from a very blue-collar upbringing, and I did not get a free ticket at college. It wasn't that smart. So I had to work through college, and I know a lot of people had to do the same thing. So we can at least provide our students with a skill that it might take them 8 years to get through college, to go up. Maybe I want to start out being a beautician. I've got that skill, but you know what? The bigger skill might be I want to own my own beauty shop or my own beauty supply company, that I have those capabilities. Somehow we just need to do a balance in it. And we hear all the time about college readiness, college readiness, college readiness, and the district is judged on college readiness. Well, why not career readiness? Why can't we be judged on how many kids we have actively participating and getting these certifications? That should be part of how people look at Dallas ISD. We need a lot of opportunities out there. I do appreciate the work that Linda, you've done. You've helped with that early college over at Samuel, and right now Spruce is on the chopping block, or not chopping block, but the stage right now, because we are trying to get a CATE program in there, a very robust CATE program, and I'm hoping that will come to fruition as successfully as the Samuel program did. But we need to have these type of programs at every comprehensive high school, and I would say at least 3 or more of these programs, different programs at each comprehensive high school, rather than to have them clustered in one area. Make sure we look at an overall vision of the district as a whole. And if we've got a cosmetology program up here in the west sector. We should also have one in the southeast, and so it's easily accessible. Maybe not have the same programs at every comprehensive high school, but have it where I don't have to go all the way across town on an hour and a half drive every morning to go to the school that has the particular certification that I want. So I'm happy with what we've done so far. I'll be even happier when next year we come back and this list has doubled or quadrupled. So thank you for what you've done. And I think the glass, I don't know, is it half full, half empty? I don't know. You know, ask me a year from now.
It's half.
Half full. Okay, we'll go half full. We'll be in the positive. But thank you for what you've done, and I know that it's going to get even better and stronger in whatever I can do to help support you in this particular endeavor. I am 100% on board for it.
Trustee Bingham. Trustee Cowan.
I've already spoken once, but just quickly, so Adamson has this brand-new, beautiful auto tech building,
It's very-
but I don't see them on the list. Are we not funding a certification program, or they just didn't ask, or?
They did not have certifications in place last year. We're working with them this year.
Trustee Cowan. Trustee Jones.
Thank you. Building on that question, and it comes back to recommendations that came through the Physical Assets Committee, so I direct this to the future facilities. We do need to do resource planning. The tools of the trade are a critical part of making sure we have the right level, the right standard of training, because we have gone, and I think the part that many may not be aware of is we're using standards of industry. We're not using education standards that may have come through some other means. We're using the actual workforce standards of industry. And another thing to point out is it's not a question anymore of every child going to college. If you are in the workforce and you do things like you do programs of certification or other, you will eventually go through higher education. It's inevitable because the training around workforce today is a continuum. So it's sort of the new normal for education to be looking at this as not mutually exclusive. It's not either or, it's and. So the standards of education as it relates to the foundations, like the STEM skills, the STEM areas that we talk about, and the reading skills, and the language skills, and the reasoning skills, these are all still critical, and I don't think that's, for any of us, changed. But what has changed is the skills are now the building blocks for which you can take yourself beyond your limits. And I think that all of us need to get very clear about the workforce of the future and its requirements, and how that ties back to the education of today is really something we've got to, continue to invest in. So this is not your father's Oldsmobile by any standards. And again, I just want to commend, I know this report doesn't do justice to two other things. Number one is our relationship with the Community College District, which has been a critical partner for not only having the resources, but also having the types of folks who can train to the industry standards, because your faculty is equally important here. And the second is the opportunities to expand into areas that we otherwise wouldn't be able to address directly. So that partnership, just want to underscore, and certainly you've heard it from, it sounds like everybody across this horseshoe, that the more we, the deeper we go into the comprehensives, the more options and more places. Clearly, that's the goal. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Jones. Trustee Bingham.
Yeah, just two more things. One of these is a concern. At Spruce High School, there's a program there. It has to do with automobile repair and things. Several years ago, we had a principal at Spruce who tried to do away with this program, and we had to fight to keep it on there. And if we hadn't stepped up, then the program would have been gone. And if you look up there, 100% of the kids are certified. Superintendent Miles, is there some way, and hopefully, and maybe this is an Ann Smisco problem, or not problem, but challenge. I don't think that a principal should be able to go in and say, you know what, I think I want to do away with the automotive program, or I want to do away with the cosmetology. And cosmetology was at Spruce, and it was done away with. We weren't able to save it. but somehow we need somebody a little bit higher up who looks at these programs and says, wait a minute, this is a successful program. Why are you doing away with it? Well, we're doing away with it because we decided we wanted to go into engineering rather than this. And yet it's a successful program. So I think we've got to be sensitive to what is working. Clearly, this program works at Spruce. But if we hadn't stepped in and said, no, you can't do that, we would have lost that program. Unfortunately, we did lose the cosmetology. The other thing is, it has to do with our early childhood education. And I just happened to notice in the newspaper, some of us still read the paper part of the newspaper, Tonnell, and we don't do it the E thing. But we are going to attempt to beef up the number of teachers' aides in our school. Teachers' aide, that's a certification. Why can't we have something in place that high school year where young women or men who maybe they don't feel like they can go to college, they don't have the resources, but yet we could partner with, say, Eastfield College at off of Buckner, because I know they've got this particular program where our girls or guys can get that certification. They graduate from high school and boom, they go into a teacher's aide job, which might eventually go into a teaching certificate. I mean, to me, that's an opportunity, because if we do what we said we're going to do, like 600 new teacher's aides, why not grow our own? Those are some opportunities I don't want us to miss.
We're talking to DCCCD about just that.
Excellent.
Trustee
Okay,
Bingham?
thank you.
Okay, trustees, we are now on to, thank you very much. We are now on to item B, staff attendance. Mr. Miles.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President and members of the board. Staff attendance is important for our children's education. Both teachers, administrators, central office, anybody who's employed by the district. We know we want to grow our attendance rate. Ideally, we would be at 97-98% attendance rate. We're not there yet, and so we want to look at our carrots and sticks to help grow the attendance rate of staff. And Ms. Darville is here today to talk about how we might beef up our policy to do just that, provide some carrots and sticks to grow our attendance rate.
Good afternoon, trustees. So today's presentation is really an overview, and then you'll see later on the agenda, DEC Local is coming today for the first read, and that will dig into some of the details of staff attendance. So this is going to be very high level. So starting in the presentation, there are going to be definitions regarding attendance. So the first being the overall attendance rate, which includes all absences on all work days, including the code AABS, which is an attendance code used in payroll regarding if you're away on business, essentially, but you're still working. The adjusted attendance rate disregards any absence where an employee is conducting district business, but is not physically present in the classroom. So that's something you're doing, business, professional development, you're attending a conference, etc. That's referenced there. The full day attendance rate will consider any absence where an employee is not present for any portion of the work day on any day. So if you clock out briefly and then clock back in, this would be calculated as part of that attendance rate. The student contact attendance rate would consider any absence where an employee is not physically in the classroom or workplace, regardless of the reason why. Any various attendance code that is an instructional day for students. And then the discretionary adjusted attendance rate considers any absence where an employee has discretion regarding the absence, personal day, etc. Dock absences or dock days is a code also used when an employee has exceeded the number of days in their time off balance that results in your pay being docked as a result. So you essentially exceeded your days, and so you're not going to be compensated for the day that you're out, but you're still not present. And so just to provide some context as to why there are several definitions. As you can see, attendance can be defined in many different ways, and there are many different scenarios that come into play. In talking with staff throughout the district, people were seeking clarity in terms of where will this type of absence fall into this larger picture. So the number of dock days, and remember the dock days again are the days with which you exceed your available balance of days, so you are not paid for those days. The dock days for 13-14 are listed here by campus-based employee group. And so attendance rate trends for 13-14 are listed on slide 8, and these are in accordance with the definitions that I just provided to you by the groups that were represented on the last slide. So for each of those definitions, you'll see what the attendance rate was for that group. And so to Superintendent Miles's point at the beginning, a goal would be definitely in the high 90th percentile, minimally more in the range of 95, et cetera, because we know the impact that these positions have on student learning. In terms of where they fall in this group, we looked at categories less than 85%, 85 to 90%, 91 and 95%, and then greater than 95%. And we see the majority of our employees end up in the greater than 95%, but when you look at the other categories and where employees end up, the impact of their absence is huge on student learning. So looking at how do we move the categories that are in the first 3 blocks, the less than 85%, 85 to 90, and 91 and 95, to that greater than 95% group to increase and support student outcomes. So as mentioned also in the introduction, we are looking at incentive programming in addition to creating a more professional culture around staff attendance. And so policy will propose some potential incentives, looking at perhaps returning a local day, a buyback of unused local days. So we know there are some scenarios where employees accrue local days over time, and then when they determine they would like to leave the district or the profession, then they start using their days consistently for long periods of time, which has them not at their assignment on a given day. Or campus-based incentive programs, things like campuses with the highest attendance, there may be rewards and that sort of thing. So as I mentioned before, we're starting with local policy, and we're still working on developing what some of the incentive programming could entail based on what is approved by the board and local. So in terms of monitoring attendance, we've discussed a 95% attendance rate by next year, and looking at how do we hold people accountable, potentially making it part of evaluations, monitoring it monthly. So we have been working very hard behind the scenes. I've been spending a lot of time with Dr. Terry's shop as well as some data experts, so we can pull and create a dashboard regarding attendance and the different rates of our staff, and then revamping our policy to create clarity for our staff members. We get quite a few questions regarding attendance and how to report attendance and what code should be used, and do you use your non-duty, do you use your local days, et cetera, and how this incorporates into leaves and that sort of thing. So we wanted to get to a point where the policy is a lot more clear on how staff report attendance and what expectations are around attendance in the district.
Thank you, Ms. Darville. Trustees will open it up for questions. If you have a question pertaining particularly to the policy or policy proposal, we'll hold those questions until the actual policy discussion. Let's keep the conversation on the data and the presentation at hand. We'll start with Trustee Foreman and we'll come around.
A few questions.
Sure.
You said, in your slide, you say you want the goal is 95% attendance?
Mm-hmm.
What is the current goal? What is the current goal?
The current rate?
Right.
The rate would have to be recalculated for 14-15. All the data looks back at 13-14.
What is 13-14?
But I would have to look by category. It's posted on the dashboard. We can pull it up.
Why that's difficult for me. When you come in and say you want a 95% attendance rate and you can't tell me what it currently is, what are you going from to? That's just a question, and you don't have to answer that, but that's a problem.
No, that's,
Isn't it on slide 8?
Well, it actually,
2.9.
it just says, it's 92.9? Okay, so we're talking about going up about 2 percentage points. Okay, the next thing is, if it's 2 percentage points, before I say that, this basically generates around teachers and principals, but it says nothing about administrative staff. Is that correct?
Not in this presentation, it is not correct.
So, what is the difference between looking at the attendance for the teachers or the people that are directly related to the schools and not looking at administration?
We are also looking at administration. This presentation was focused on direct student impact, and so at central office staff, we have already begun the conversation, started reporting, started having conversations with people who have excessive absences.
The only thing I'm saying, Carmen, is that when you present to me only that portion, superintendent, it makes it very difficult for me because I think everybody has to be held accountable. And when it's focused on that piece, that's a problem for me. And I'll end with this and ask my other questions later. One of the things about me is I always want to know about cost. So when you start talking about incentives to get people to, we're talking about 2 percentage points. What would that cost be to us? Do we have any idea?
Actually, if we got to that rate, it'd be a savings. We pay a lot for people who don't come to work, either in substitute pay or in lessened efficiency and effectiveness. So if we were to get 2 percentage points more out of our staff, we'd actually be more effective and save money.
But that, Superintendent, that sounds wonderful, but for me, I'm a visual person. And so I have to see the savings because when we're talking about buying back hours, and you've got 10,000 teachers, I'm not quite sure that it will ultimately be a savings. So I'd have to see real numbers in regards to what the difference is. Thank you.
Trustee Foreman, Trustee Jones.
Thank you. What's a benchmark for this in terms of what does success look like for other districts? I mean, what's a standard of high performing?
We had talked about between the 95th and 98th percentile. I don't have other district data in front of me, but we were talking about for high performing areas, what did that look like for them?
And do we know the reasons why these attendance rates vary across maybe campuses or even subpopulations?
So we have started doing some spot checking where we see instances where there are high absentee rates or attendance issues, et cetera, and we're starting to parse it out to say what was going on at this campus or what was going on with this particular employee. And so there are rationales in most categories that say this is what was going on that caused staff to be out. Some of which, Trustee Jones, you might find as valid reasons, some of which you might find that we would want to encourage the staff to be present.
One of the issues that came up recently was brought to my attention was somebody who had an injury and had to take more days based on recovery, but the way the attendance rate structure and the allowable days worked, and especially now tied to the new performance evaluation system, they felt they were between a rock and a hard place, literally, that they literally had to heal back on the job because none of that was baked in. Do we know if those are the reasons or if it's something, more random than that? I mean, that's the issue for me is knowing why.
Right,
and
correct.
knowing exactly what, cause and effect we can do something about, and where it's something that It's just the nature of workforce.
Right. And so we have had a lot of conversations, even just looking at benefits, right? Are these medical leaves? Was it an injury? Was it a sickness leave? Was it maternity leave? Those sorts of things, to understand the why behind these, because you don't want a situation where an employee is being penalized for approved leaves for medical reasons and things like that. So when we discuss the policy later, it's really parsed out to account for some of those issues.
Then with respect to the data, have we looked at this campus to campus and seen where there may be potential correlation to the climate survey, for example? And, is that part of the analysis?
Yes, those are some of the things that we are looking at as well and have looked at.
And I'd like to see more of that kind of representation. Percentages are interesting, but they're kind of an aggregate number that you really can't know what's going on behind the number. So that I think that would give better clarity on some of on how we shape the policy. So I think that would be quite helpful.
Okay.
Could I also add, sir, that a lot of information's on our dashboard today. You can get it campus by campus in all these different categories, discretionary, non-discretionary. It can be parsed out even more, but that's available to the board as well.
Well, I realize that, and I'm actually a big user of the dashboard. Part of the challenge is the issue where the dashboard is just data. It doesn't. It's not data for which you understand the why. And the challenge is you may look at data. You may look at two pieces of data for a campus, but want to know the relationship. And in the current structure of the dashboard, there's no way to see that clearly. So what I'm asking for is these kinds of questions about relationship. What's driving the attendance number, and is it, and what are our various ways of thinking about policy to address some of these things that may be just inadvertent, or, in terms of the way we're looking at it today, so we just need to adjust it to the definitional change, or maybe it is something more important that we need to know about as a board. So.
Thank you, Trustee Jones. Dr. Blackburn?
Carmen, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
If you don't mind, I'll go page by page.
Okay.
Page 4, starting with page 3, you are giving some definitions of the attendance rate. The overall attendance rate is all absences. That means no matter what the reason is, that's why an employee is absent, correct? Whether it's illness or field trip or school business or district business, absence, period. Adjusted, you are pulling out for the school district business and also taking out the illness, FMLA, and all those things. Is that correct?
No, it would just be approved business. That would go under a different category.
Okay, so only two where you distinguish the attendance rate. And on the next slide, you have full day attendance. Is that not quite the same as overall attendance?
It's not, because it would account for if you left for 2 hours. Those partial increments.
So the full day is only for those who were out for the whole 8-hour day, not if they were out for just 6 hours.
It's to reverse those who attended the full day.
I'm looking at those that were, okay. And on page 6, where you're talking about dock days, those are the days that employees were out and we had to dock their pay because they had depleted all of their leave time. Is that correct?
Correct.
So on page 7, the number of dock days, you're saying that with the teachers, you have 37,916.1 dock days. And we have approximately 10,000 teachers. So approximately 3.79 days per teacher. And we don't know why the teachers took those days. Is that correct?
Not across the board. I mean, it has an attendance code, right, according to payroll timekeeping. But if you want the specific story that lives behind the attendance code, we've only spot checked.
You have the attendance code that we could look at also?
Yes.
In relation, because to throw out a big number without having some other information
To
behind
see what they're
it,
categorized
it's
by.
just a big old number. And I think it's already been said that, well, let me ask you, why are we on looking at the campus staff? Well, not just campus staff, just teachers, assistant principals, and principals. Why only that group?
We can look at other groups as well.
I'm just asking, why did you choose this group for this presentation?
If you don't mind, sir. I asked to focus on these three because we have, I don't know, 20 different categories, and I thought we would start with campus staff first. So we didn't, the ones that are instructional. So teachers, assistant principals, principals. But we have data on TAs. We have supervisors. We have 20 different or so categories. So it was just a matter of keeping the presentations, much more simple and clear.
I appreciate that, but I think later on we're going to talk about a policy that includes all employees. Is that correct? Correct. But here you're only going to show us about half of the employees. So I'm going along with Joyce on this one. You guys are telling us about some of the story, but not all of the story. I have a concern when you don't talk about everyone. And on the incentives, explain what you mean by employees receiving additional local day.
So currently, employees receive 3 local days, and this would increase it to 4.
Everyone gets 4 days.
Correct.
That's what we're proposing in the policy.
That's the incentive?
Correct.
And the other 2 bullets.
All employees get the additional 4 days.
Additional 1 day.
Oh, it's 1 additional day.
Right. Employees already receive 3.
So all employees are going to get 1 additional day,
Potentially.
potentially.
Well, it depends on what the board decides.
For the policy change.
Right now, explain to me how do you get that extra day according to this slide where you say it's an incentive? What's the incentive to get that extra day?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question. How
do they get that extra day?
Just by policy.
Okay, we're going to come back to the policy after a while. Now I'll ask a whole bunch of questions then. Okay, the annual buyback. Explain that to me.
So one of the potential ideas that we were considering is that if an employee does not use their local day, so right now, as we mentioned, employees get 3 local days each year. If I, as an employee, don't use my local days and I come every day, that at the end of the year, I could sell my days back to the district.
You're talking about the local days.
Correct, but I mean, there would be accrual points, right? It would be above, hypothetically, that you could say 10 is the threshold. So days you have beyond 10, you could sell back.
So if I'm a veteran employee and I have 200 days, how many can I sell back beyond the 10?
We're not to that point yet. So these are potential incentive ideas in terms of the specifics of each of these incentives. Those have not been determined yet since the policy is just coming today for a first read.
Let me ask this.
Sure.
I'm glad you said it's for a first reading. Before we do any kind of incentives, which is going to be an impact on the budget, you will come to this board for a budget amendment or as part of the budget process. So either if we're going to have a budget amendment, then it can take effect this year. Is that your plan, to have it take effect this year or next year?
On the incentives, I don't have a particular plan. It's really going to be at the will of the board.
We're proposing this year, the end of this year.
That means we're going to talk about this several times. And the campus-based incentive programs, give me an idea about what you mean.
An example might be if a campus were to achieve, everyone has 98% attendance rate or above, depending on the category, that there would be some prize to a pizza party, or it just depends what the prize might be, but something to incentivize campuses to have high attendance rates.
So that would be in the campus budget.
No, the proposal would be that it would come somewhere out of central so that it's not taking from the campus. It would be a reward to the campus.
Campus-based incentive, then the campus does not decide on what that reward is going to be.
So that we leave it open right now. For example, we could say the top 20 attendance rates, discretionary attendance rates for the district, top 20 schools. If that were the case, and the district would provide some sort of compensation or reward for the employees in the top 20 schools. We don't have a specific plan yet to do that, but that's what we're thinking about doing.
Okay, we're doing a whole lot of thinking right now and don't have much in the plan, but we want to do a policy and have no idea about how we want to move forward.
Policy will drive the next steps.
Okay, let's see how we get past the policy. Just so that you'll know that I'm asking right now, you know that I put it in writing, I'm asking for the attendance for not only the campus-based staff, not only the teachers, principals, and assistant principals, but all other campus categories and all employee categories.
For the entire district.
Entire district.
Sure.
Thank you, Dr. Blackburn. Trustee Bingham?
Yeah. First off, on the incentives, if I were a teacher, I think an ice cream party or a pizza party wouldn't cut it. But let me just offer up what I think would be something as a building that might cause the teachers and the staff to work together would be some kind of incentive like a classroom set of iPads, or is it called a cow, those things that they move from room, a cow, something that's significant that the building you get your attendance rate up to 98%, you get a cow. And I know that sounds weird. I live on a farm, but y'all know it's a computer. But something that the whole faculty could buy into, some kind of, to me, technology, because this is what I hear so much from the campus is more and more technology. So I know that y'all have probably a lot more ideas than I do when it comes to technology. Also on the, is it 5 state days? Okay, so, and the 5 state days are accumulated. So, I mean, you could accumulate, if you had a long career, up to 75 or 80 days. I know that a lot of the local districts, when it comes to the local days, they do exactly what you're proposing. At the end of the year, you get your 3 local days. You either use those 3 days or they automatically reimburse you. So I think that would be right on target with what the suburbs are going to do. The other thing, this is just, I'm just throwing this out, but my parents used to say just because you have money in your pocket doesn't mean you got to spend it. The same thing goes, I think a lot of times it's a mental state. Just because you have 8 days at the beginning of each year, you know, as a teacher, you don't have to use those 8 days. And I think that should be emphasized. You know, you want to save those days up if at all possible. So you're not going to lose. Maybe there's not an emphasis on the 5 days that it can accumulate. We need to probably have more emphasis like, you're not going to lose these 5 days if you don't use them, so they can't accumulate. And over the course of my career, it was very, very helpful because a lot of times you might have to have a serious surgery where you're out for 5 or 6 weeks, and you can use that time. When it comes to the attendance rate, nobody can replace a teacher in the classroom the way a qualified teacher is. I mean, we have got some good substitutes. A lot of them are former retired teachers. But when they go into the classroom, they are winging it for a day. Hopefully, they'll have a lesson plan, but I know many times in the classroom, there's no lesson plan. They just have to wing it. I don't think we should ask any more of our teachers, principals, and assistant principals than we ask for our students. We want our ADA up as high as possible for our students, so why should we ask any less of our teachers? So if we have a goal of 97% for ADA for our students, why not 97 for our staff people? I don't think that's too much to ask. I do think, I don't remember who it was that raised the point, it might have been Trustee Foreman. I do think we need to look campus by campus. If there's a high rate of absenteeism on a specific campus, and if we look at the history, like maybe for 2 years running, hey, they had great attendance, but all of a sudden, wham, it just starts bottoming out. Something is probably going on, and we need to look at that, whether it's, did they get a new principal in there? Maybe that principal's driving everybody nuts. I don't know. But there's got to be a reason, and that's in a very simplistic manner. The other thing that I hear so much is that principals hate being pulled off campus for whatever reason. You know, we just need to get those meetings down to a minimum. I know that sometimes they have to be trained, but golly, if we can do that in the summer, let's do that in the summer and pay them. They need to be on the campus. I know that when we figure student absenteeism, we have, I believe it's 75 to 90, they have to be in class 75% or more days. And if they are out more than 75%, I believe they automatically flunk the class. There's no way they can make it up. Is that right?
There are ways they can make it up, but it is, if you're over a certain number, you have to do extraordinary things to make up that
Right.
time.
And it doesn't matter if it's excused, a field trip, or whatever. And, you know, that's the standard we set for the students. So why not do it for our teachers, for our staff? But I think I look forward to the conversations that we're going to have on this, and I do think we need to raise the rate of attendance for our faculties and staff, if for no other reason than it's going to definitely impact what happens with our student achievement. And please, no ice cream or pizza parties. Let's get some big bucks going in there.
Bingham, Trustee Nuttall.
To add to, I guess this will include in Trustee Blackburn's, I would like to see the number of dot days for EDs, assistant soups, and chiefs, as well as their attendance rate trends for those three categories.
EDs, assistant soups, and chiefs.
Yeah. And then, as Trustee Bingham said, the average daily attendance for our students impact money. Can we look, I would like to see the data on number of days missed per student per year. We used to receive that. The number of days students miss and our average, what is our average dollar per amount of daily attendance? And the average students absent daily, because that's the impact on money too. So Superintendent Mao said it was an impact on budget, so I'm trying to figure out.
Can you please repeat that? Number of days students miss?
Yeah, we have the teachers, we're saying this is
Right.
what the teachers.
Right.
So we have to take that from the top on down, leadership. So we're looking at the assistants, we're looking at the chiefs.
Right, got
there.
that one.
Then let's look at the EDs, the assistant soup, and then the EDs. Then you already given us the teachers. Now let's look at the students, because all of that impact money.
Right.
So I know, Mr. Terry, you have that data already, right? Yeah. Some you keep average daily attendance, because that's a dollar amount. So I would like to see the average, and I guess that's more a Mr. Terry question, the average daily attendance as far as the dollars. And then our average student, of the impact of the revenue that we lose for our students' absence. You know the dollar amount?
Approximately $40 per day.
And then how many students per day are absent? And the dollar amount? Do you have?
Dollar amount?
Do you have
I don't have the total dollar amounts in my head.
Okay, I would like to just see it, because accountability flows all the way up and down. So that was just some data, if we're gonna impact policy. So if I understand correctly, on one of the slides, I think it's slide 11 maybe, you talk about, so the teachers are given 5 days, correct?
State, 5 state days,
5
3
state
local
days.
days.
So it says principal evaluation, so the principals are given that same amount of days, correct?
Correct.
So beyond my 5 days is when it's going to impact my evaluation, I'm going to get in trouble? Or is, if I use my 5 days that by that are given to me.
I can't speak specifically to what the threshold is. Dr. Smithko or the superintendent, I'm not quite sure.
Can you say the question another way?
Teachers are given 5 days. You say you can take 5 days. Like Superintendent Miles, we the board gave you 8 days to consult. So you're given those days. That's within your right you can have. So beyond that days that you receive, will I get in trouble and is that going to count against me beyond the days that are given to me every year?
So it depends on what the reason for going over the amount is. So there are lots of ways, and you'll see in the policy discussion, and it's in current policy, there's medical leaves, there's family, FMLA, there's all kinds of reasons why a person might go over the 5 state days and the 3 currently local days. And we look at that. What we're also going to look at, though, is if you don't have one of those official leaves and you are taking discretionary, and that's why the attendance definition for discretionary leave is important. If you take discretionary days over, we'll look closely at that, look at your record of attendance, and yes, there may be a consequence up to and including termination.
So if I go beyond my 8 days, that's possible. But if I'm within my 8 days, I have a child sick, just need whatever. That's not going to go on my evaluation. So 8 and below. So you're going to start at 8 and above.
Well, the thing to keep in mind, Trustee Nuttall, is that days accrue. So you get the 5 and 3 each year. So people may have more than just 5 days.
I understand that. But I'm just trying to figure out what's the line that, your daughter is sick, your child is sick, something happens. How are we going to measure that when you start talking about evaluation? You're talking policy that people are going to be reprimanded. Just so who's going to determine what's the cutoff when there's some things that are unavoidable? Your house flood one day that you are given those days, and by right, you can take those days.
If I could add, I think that's a very important question and very important for us to have a discussion about. I think there are always reasons, but then there are not good reasons either. If you know your daughter's graduating this year, then you need to save your day, one of your 8 days, so that you can attend your daughter's graduation. What happens in some cases is that people use up their days by November, and then they're stuck, and then they want to have days off, and so we have to consider all kinds of reasons once we look at a person going over the 8.
And on I guess a note of that, you know your daughter's graduating, but however you have your mother, your father, that's actually happened to people, die, and you can't. So I'm just want us to be, when we're looking at reprimand, you said possible termination, there are some things that could happen in that year of crisis for you that we are looking at on that. So I'm just trying to understand we're being fair, legal, and consistent in how we across the board.
Trustee, go ahead.
You have something you want to say, Trustee Moran? Or did you say something?
No, it was me. I was just going to share with you that that's one of the things we're looking about for it to be fair, is that if you have extenuating circumstances like a death in your family or something of that nature, that there would be an attendance review committee that could issue you a day if you are out of days so that your pay is not docked, to account for circumstances such as the one that you mentioned.
Your control.
Correct.
And I guess when you look at our plan, the board's, the leading indicators, we had said that we were going to look, our goal in 2013 was 96% was the target. So I know Trustee Foreman, we don't know the target for 2012, 2013. What was our target then? Do we know it? Because I was looking, it said average staff attendance, administrators, average staff full day attendance was 94%, and then our target was 96%. So in
we can get that to you.
For 2012 and 2013, and I guess once again, going back to Trustee Foreman, the baseline that we're starting from, since it's gonna impact policy. So I have those requests.
Thank you, Trustee.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Nuttall. Trustee Cowan.
I agree with everything that's been said so far. Y'all have done a great job recapping my opinion. But let me just state my opinion on how this is being teed up. You're asking us to change a big policy. We know our employees love our days, their days. We do need to know why, and I would like to see a map of the campuses and their percentages, because you're asking us, you're saying there's a problem that you need to apply a stick, and here's the carrot. We need to know why. These are really big numbers. You're saying 635 teachers are basically taking 5 weeks off a year from their classrooms. We need to know why. Is it medical? Is it something else? Or are they just burn out and they're not coming back? We as a board, if you're asking us to change a major policy, we need to know why. So the way this is being teed up right now, we just need more information. And I look forward to maybe next time you bring back the same presentation with the questions that are being asked and the information, so we can make a good decision. Thank you.
Trustee Cowan, Trustee Morath.
We're apparently jumping around in the agenda a bit to talk both about the policy and this presentation. With regard to this presentation, thank you for the information. What would be useful for me is some comparative benchmarks, both prior years and other districts, just so I get a sense of where these numbers shake out from a performance standpoint. Just helps me understand the nature of the metrics. That's all I have.
Thank you, Trustee Morath. Trustee Foreman.
I have one other question. I'm trying to stay on the presentation. But my question is that there have been practices where assistant principals and principals have been able to leave the campus and go to Austin to work on their degrees. How does that, and I'd like to know, you don't have to answer it now, but I need to know how that filters into this process also, as we talk about how we're going to change it for the masses. That's a number that needs to be clarified, and how that's going to be handled, and any other of those extenuating circumstances like that.
Thank you, Trustee Foreman. Trustee Jones.
I had already made the point, and Trustee Morath underscored it. I mean, I'd like to know what a top-tier district would look like, not just what some of our peer group may be doing or not doing. I need to have an understanding of the standard, and of course, a lot has been said that I think is very critical to what this body needs to make a better decision. On page 7, coming back to, I think it was what Trustee Foreman had tried to get at, if it's possible to take the number of doc days and translate those into dollars. I mean, there is a cost there.
That would be a Dr. Terry question.
That's really, I think, what was trying to be understood, is what is it costing the district in hard dollars. But then I think the more critical question is, we have a goal and an important objective here, which is to make sure we have a highly qualified teacher in front of every classroom all the time. And the deficiency you come into, I mean, I understand what we're trying to get at here, but you're also trying to match standards of your workforce in relationship to how they are able to have the flexibility they need around areas, and we've covered that. So part of our duty is to make sure we cover that. So I'd like to also understand how we do that, because it's not as much of a problem if you've built it in. And that's another part of the story I don't think we spoke enough about. Workforce, there are standards, and there are corporate standards for some of the highest performing organizations. I'd say if we can learn from them, there's a lot to be gleaned about workforce effectiveness and workforce happiness and lots of things that go into play. But I think for the purpose of this body, it does matter at the campus level. And I think everything we talk about, we've got to start looking at the unit level. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Trustee Foreman has one more request for information.
Just a point of information.
Yes, ma'am.
My question was, what would the cost be to us to buy back these days that we're talking about buying back as a part of the policy, along with the incentives that we would have to also shelter the cost? And would that be cost effective?
Thank you, Trustee Foreman. Trustees, we're now on to item C, Outcomes Report Results of 2013-2014 PDOS.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. Carmen Dario will also review the outcomes for 2013-2014. The board will recognize that PDOS, we're not using PDOS this year, but I wanted Ms. Darville to just give a real brief look at what the outcomes for PDOS from last year were, because when we get our TEI evaluation, which is much differentiated, this will be kind of like the before and then the after picture. I know it's apples and oranges a little bit, but just like we looked at the principal eval, and then compared to last year, it might be helpful just to see what the PDOS results look like in a broad sense now.
So, this is a slide you have actually seen before, comparing the components of PDOS to the components of TEI. So this is to act as more of a review. But considering the performance, achievement, and student surveys components, how the two instruments compare. And so, as you already know, in TEI, performance is 50%, almost 100% of PDOS was performance. No student achievement in PDOS, it's 35% of TEI. And then student surveys were obviously not a part of PDOS, but 15% will be incorporated into TEI. Again, in terms of differentiation, to the point of Superintendent Miles, you'll see that in TEI you have 9 possible ratings. This is also a slide that you've seen before, which PDOS only had 4 possible rating categories. And so creating a differentiated model really accounts better for where teachers are and the support that they may or may not need. So, looking at the PDOS results from 13-14, this represents about 40% of our teaching population, and since then we've received the rest of the data from 13-14, and the trend remained the same. So you're looking at the majority of our teachers ended up in proficient or exceeds expectations, and essentially hardly anyone ended up in unsatisfactory or below expectations. And it was just a reminder that in PDOS, the results were so skewed to the right, there wasn't really a lot of meaningful feedback to move the crafts forward for several teachers who fell somewhere in between on this continuum. And so one of the objectives of TEI is to really look by category with job-embedded professional development to take teaching to the next level for our employees. So that's really just the overview of how the PDOS results came out.
Thank you, Ms. Darville. We'll start on this side. Trustee Morath. Trustee Cowan. Trustee Nuttall.
Question, in 2013-2014, we didn't use spot observations. I thought we were integrating spot observations, so we...
Spot observations were taking place. It's not a part of PDOS itself.
So we didn't do spot observations.
We did do spot observations, but they weren't a part of the appraisal tool.
We used them to give effective feedback to teachers and also to train to ensure that our principals were monitoring instruction, but they're not included in the PDOS rubric.
So they didn't, when you say on slide 5, you had exceeds expectation and then 60% proficient and 0% below expectations. Is that
4 or
from
5.
the PDOS results of the evaluation of the principals?
Evaluation of the teachers.
I mean, of the teachers. I
Yeah.
mean, the principal's evaluation of the teachers?
Right.
For this past year, 2013-2014.
Correct.
And they used the PDOS. They didn't use, because we just voted for the team.
Right.
But I thought they were using the spot observations and all the elements of the TEI with the PDOS.
No, that wasn't part of their official appraisal. The spots, etc.
So the renewal, the non-renewal of teachers and teachers leaving was based on the PDOS as well as the principals?
PDOS, based on principles, yes.
You made a comment that, to show that the PDOS didn't work, and I'm just trying to figure out what did we use to evaluate. We used PDOS.
I'm not saying PDOS didn't work. I'm saying the results are not as differentiated. So as part of the appraisal, you have very few teachers who ended up in the left two categories of unsatisfactory and below expectations.
But did we not use the elements of TEI, the spot observation, making sure we had effective teachers? So you're telling me a year of 2013, 2014, this past year, we didn't.
So in terms of
Saying it was just this past year, you're saying that you didn't have that many teachers, and we were supposed to, our number one goal, effective teaching, and we used the elements of TEI, and some campuses used it, I'm aware, and we were piloting, so I'm just trying to understand where.
So, I mean, the performance component of PDOS, you still have to be observed by, an administrator and evaluated, et cetera. But were people evaluated on TEI last year? No.
No, we didn't use several of the aspects of TEI. That's why we brought a rigorous evaluation system to actually correct this problem. PDOS doesn't differentiate, isn't as rigorous, and doesn't include achievement or surveys or any number of things. And so these are the results that are typical year to year with PDOS, and that's why it was changed to TEI. But TEI only started this year. We weren't using the same elements to do PDOS.
Okay. Well, I understand that. I'm just saying this is past year, and we hired 2,000 new teachers, and I have to go back to some board meetings that we talked about increasing spot observation. We were still using the elements of TEI with integrating it with PDOS, and I'm just trying to see why we're getting this PDOS results when I'm just trying to. It was a year.
Thank you, Trustee Nuttall. Trustee Bingham?
PDOS is a totally subjective tool. And because it is subjective, it oftentimes it just goes on the whim of whoever happens to be evaluating you for that 45 minutes that one time a year. Is that a pretty safe assumption? I mean, because there's absolutely nothing objective on PDOS. I walk in, or Ann, maybe this is, you've been in, you walk in my classroom for 45 minutes, and then you evaluate me, and all of the questions on PDOS are subjective. It's whatever you happen to think.
Well, if I could, just like any other rubric, the rubric itself attempts to make it less subjective, but you're right in that there is no quantifiable specific number that you can say, yes, you engaged kids. And we've wrestled with this in the profession over time, and that's why having a really good rubric makes it as less subjective. But we all know there's an element of subjectivity you cannot remove from any metric that isn't a hard quantifiable metric. And so yes, in that sense it is subjective, but I would say that principals would argue that if you have a good tool, the subjectivity is less.
And for 3 years, we worked intensively on a new evaluation tool that would be more objective. And at the end of the day, I mean, we had some give and take, compromises, switching around, and we came up with a tool that has that element of objectivity in it. So Ann, help me out here. How many years was PDOS used? 20 years? 25?
Well, I think if you count TTAS, which was before
Right.
PDOS, it's probably 20, 25 years. Yes.
You're around then, Ann?
1972.
Hey.
I was too.
These gray hairs aren't here for nothing. So we've had 20 to 25 years with PDOS where we've been able to see how it is and how it shakes out. So we're just now entering into the first year of TEI. And there's going to be some there's going to be some little kinks and things in this new instrument, just as there was with PDOS when it first came out. And I was there also when PDOS was first rolled out, and everybody panicked, and it was a scary moment. And so I do hope we at least give, I'm not going to ask for 25 years on TEI, but I hope that we at least give it 3 years to get the kinks worked out, make sure that we can adjust it to fit what our students are before we say, hey, this isn't working, this is faulty, I got an incorrect evaluation, because I think we're going to have those kind of things happen. I think there's going to be some balancing on it. So we gave PDOS 20 plus years. I'm hoping that we give TEI at least 3 years to see how it shakes out at the end of the day.
Say something else, sir.
Yes.
The other thing to note, I think that's very important, Trustee Bingham, well said. The other thing to note, though, and when you look at the graph of the PDOS, just like the principals graph, TEI is designed to be differentiated. TEI is designed so that not everybody's going to be proficient or above. And so you're going to have a lot higher, you're going to have a more bell curve shaped result for TEI, just like you saw for the principals. This, what you're looking at, is not bell shaped. And so what that means is you're going to have people who will be concerned about their evaluation and might blame TEI even though it's designed so that it's more differentiated. So I think that's important to keep in mind, and I think that's important why, looking at this graph now, people see that down the road it will not look like this graph.
Thank you, Mr. Miles. Thank you, Trustee Bingham. Trustee Jones.
Thank you. I'm glad to see that we're moving toward differentiating effectiveness. The current PDOS exemplaries, would we say, based on our standard of what we know, we're trying to move everybody to, that group is an accurate representation of our current quality of our best teachers? Or the amount of, or the number of, and the level of how many exemplary teachers we have in the district?
If I may, I can answer that. No. I think PDOS shows that the evaluations have been inflated and that the bar for both proficiency and exemplary have been artificially low. TEI raises the bar for proficiency and therefore also raises the bar for exemplary, and so you will not have as many people in that category probably.
So page 5, it would be really helpful to have the absolute numbers. And another variable that comes up, which I think has been touched on, is turnover, because you're dealing with different populations. One of the issues that we've seen is the tenure level, the experience level, however you want to define it. To me, somebody who's new to the profession is new to the profession. I mean, they're not experienced. That's got to be somewhere shown in the data, because right now I really can't see. I mean, I probably, as many of the people sitting around this table would say, don't disagree that we're going to see a more normalized distribution. I mean, I think that's the expectation. The question is, what's the quality of our teaching faculty now? And the rubric is just going to help us do a better job of evaluating and improving performance, which is, I think, the goal. But it's still important that we understand what is the standard and that we lay that standard out. So it doesn't matter whether it's PDOS or it's, the standards change too, if I'm not.
Yeah, I think the standard has been redefined.
Right.
And that's what people will be calibrated against for the 14-15 school year.
So irrespective of the rubric, which is doing the calibration, I think it would be helpful, and I think I've said this during the TEI different meetings, to know what the standard is, because it's too open-ended at this point. We're trying to be more objective, and you say the excellence looks like this, right? That's what I'm trying to get at definitionally. Because right now, we're just talking about the differences in rubrics. But what I'm more concerned with is the quality of your teaching faculty. And how we know what that, or what is the quality of the folks that we've got, and how we're how good we're doing in improving on that, because we're investing quite a bit in a whole bunch of areas of training and professional development, and we've put a lot of resources against it. So it's important to understand what that looks like and how it matches up against the way in which we're now shifting our evaluation. I think it's a long way of saying I need a baseline, and I need to understand it from the teaching faculty level, not from just a rubric, which I can't really get at the heart of understanding the quality of my teachers.
I think it's important what you just said, Trustee Jones. The graph in front of you shows that there is not a baseline. PDOS is not a baseline for us. We've now shipped it off it. So the baseline will occur at the end of this 2014-2015 school year, when we actually rate our teachers against a pretty good rubric around performance and achievement metrics, standardize the distribution, and then you will see which teachers are proficient and which are exemplary and what their scores were, and that will be the baseline for our district.
So part of what we won't know, from what I think I just understood what you just said, will be the part where we won't know how we've improved the existing teaching faculty this year.
That's correct. We'll know some ways of comparing. For example, we'll have CEI from the past and in the future, but we won't have a performance thing to compare against, because we'll have to compare an apple to an orange. We won't have student surveys to compare. We won't have any of those aggregate measures to compare. So your baseline will be at the end of the school year.
And then, remind me again, every district but us now is still on PDOS?
Houston ISD has their own. Do you know any others, Carmen?
No, and I was
think
just
they're
at a conference. Everyone's still on
pretty
PDOS.
much PDOS.
People are
except for us.
exploring, but they haven't gotten to a point where they're ready to implement.
And then, where does this track against? I know the state's working on their own.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say the state is planning on delaying again the implementation of a new tool, and that was after speaking with them last week. So it seems to be getting pushed again.
And then, since we did go through the process of converting the principals, we have sort of the before and after picture. Do we have, and there was quite a bit of turnover there too, so you get into this tracking a person or tracking performance within individuals versus aggregate values. Have we learned anything about how we do assessment or the relevance of assessment of the target performance, what we're trying to get at? And if you don't understand my question, I can come back on it. Said differently, I see a quizzical look. We have a standard up here. We're trying to get to a level of high performance, right? So first thing we have to know is where is everybody against that standard? And how are they moving? And that's the rating, essentially. That's what you're assessing. So that's really what the rating represents, is your assessment of that. So the question was, as with the principals, if you get a high degree of turnover or you get lots of new people who have different backgrounds, different experience, skill sets, different capabilities, it's always a moving target. So how do you assess anything?
So we've assessed it in the aggregate, and we've learned several things. One is the target is 80% by the year 2020. That's been outlined for the last couple of years. We are at 49%, so we know where we are. The goal for next year is 58% for principals. And yes, the aggregate changes a little bit based on who's there, but we evaluate every year. So we will have a new number next year, and hopefully, not hopefully, it will be higher than 49% who are proficient or higher. And our goal is to get to 80%. When we establish the baseline for our teachers, we'll similarly have some targets and goals. And yes, the teacher pool will change. We will disaggregate it by first and second year and all other teachers, and show you and cut it in many different ways. But we will have a baseline, and then we'll go from there.
So, just so we're clear, I guess I need to understand where these numbers come from, where the 49 versus 58 versus 80, and what the standard should be. And again, if that's in principles, certainly we'll be mirroring that for
Sorry,
teachers.
I
so-
meant principals.
Yeah, no, I know, but I understand the point, and that's because these are whole different universe systems. I mean, so we just got to be very clear about targets, performance, quality, and all those things being measured the right way. So I think this is a longer conversation. Certainly, it's important to have information about what our highly qualified teacher pool looks like. And that's the other issue, and the last point I'll make is highly qualified teacher is an actual definition.
Correct.
And so I know that term gets used pretty easily. I just want to make sure that when we talk about that standard, we know all the ingredients.
Yeah, because there is a definition by TEA in terms of credentialing versus execution in the classroom. Right, effectiveness. Thank you.
I think just from what I've studied nationally, a lot of districts who are trying to get to high performance in this area, irrespective of the rubric they use or the evaluation process they use, all come up with a standard and say that here it is, and can define it and know what it looks like, and so everybody's clear about what the expectation as far as what is high performing for that district looks like. And to that point, they use specific ingredients. So they'll say highly qualified means you're certified and you have these 5 things. It's not the whole of it, but that's part of the requirements. So that's what I'm trying to understand. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Jones. Trustee Foreman.
I have no vested interest in TEI. I wasn't here to vote on, and I'm concerned, basically because when I look at, there's nothing to compare it with. We're the only district that's doing it, and so I'm concerned about it affecting us competitively. And how we go about getting highly qualified teachers in our classroom. And I do know that 57% of the teachers hired this year had no experience. It's very difficult to get highly qualified teachers with no experience. There are some exceptions, but that's not the rule. In 2013, 2014, 36% of the teachers that were hired had no experience. So if that's the trend we're tracking, it's going to be very difficult to get highly qualified teachers. And just an aside, I'm on the southwest side of Oak Cliff. I have Duncanville, DeSoto, Cedar Hill, Lancaster, all school districts that in population is beginning to look more like the ISD. And if we're not competitive for the teachers, we're going to have a serious problem attracting highly qualified teachers. I don't say that to say I'm against measuring teachers, because I think we should be doing that, but our competitiveness is what I'm concerned about with this instrument. And if we continue tracking, increasing the number of inexperienced teachers, we're never going to get to where we're going. And so I just think we really need to take a look at that, Superintendent. I know that 42% of our current teachers have 5 years or less experience. That's 42% of our teachers, 5 years or less. And if the numbers are wrong, these are the numbers that were given to me, so I don't want people to think I'm just making this up. But we need to be very careful as we move forward to ensure that we are attracting via TEI or whatever process we have in place, that we're attracting teachers that's going to be able to move our students forward. Not just to say we've got an anomaly, we've got something different from everybody else. That has its good points and it has its bad points. And so I just caution us as we continue to move forward to make sure that we are not running away the good teachers and the good principals.
Thank you, Trustee Foreman. Okay.
I had a question.
Trustee Nuttall?
When is a highly qualified report due?
The snapshot is taken on the 15th, I believe, but our certification officer is working on it now.
So do you have the data report of the highly qualified teachers, that number are probationary teachers? Because we have probationary teachers that have yet to receive their certification, right?
You have a probationary certification. So you have a cert if you have a probationary cert, but the highly qualified report would be ready later this month.
So it's due. I would like to see a copy just to know
Sure.
who. But so on this PDOS report, that's with all our work. That was all. What teachers were that? All teachers were under this PDOS report.
Correct.
Our new hires that we hired in 2012, 2013 are all under this PDOS report.
Mm-hmm.
Superintendent Miles, are we still using the 3 R's for everybody else?
Yes.
And do we have a data snapshot or how well the people did on the 3 R's? Exceeds, proficient, or below?
Probably can get that. I don't.
I'm just curious, did we do a data, because leadership is all the way. So we're still using the old 3R system. And so it'd be interesting to see, because you have to coach your people up and how well we're leading, how that snapshot of the 3Rs, because that's an old system as well.
Yes, that data is not rolled up district-wide, and there are some other evaluation tools like the LP.
Carmen, if I can just make sure, no, just so we can stay germane to the PDOS conversation, that is a request. If you could.
No, I'm just saying, do we track that data as well, just to see, our people are as good as you are, as good as we lead. So I'm just trying to understand it all the way up. But the highly qualified, the 3Rs is now. I was just curious if we're still using the 3Rs. We are still using the 3Rs. But the highly qualified report and looking at that, I would like to
I'll
see
get it
that.
to you when
I
it's
know it's
complete.
due pretty soon.
Okay.
Thank you, Trustee Nuttall. Yes, ma'am. All right, trustees, we're now on to item D, the way forward, Destination 2020.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. I briefed this board on the comprehensive plan and some of the big goals back in August. We also supplied a written document earlier in the summer, but we know that planning continues. As part of that, also, we've convened the Future Facilities Task Force. But with regard to the big ideas, the big buckets for Destination 2020, I've asked Mike Koprovsky and others in the district to look closely at the details of some of the big areas and to provide the board even more information around those big areas that we're looking at, such as early childhood and school choice. So Mike Koprovsky, Chief of Innovation and Transformation, will provide an update.
Okay, thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you all are well. So we wanted to talk to you today about what we're calling the Comprehensive Program Plan. And I'm joined by Alan Cohen, of course, the early childhood guy, and Linda Johnson, who's the college and career readiness gal. So we're excited about this. We really are.
Official title?
Those are the official titles, right? And so we're going to walk you through this thing that we're calling the Comprehensive Program Plan, and this does build upon the briefings that were given by Superintendent Miles during the August board meetings. And just so that you're aware as well, we've included a more detailed written report as part of this month's packet in the board library, and that's sort of a companion piece to these PowerPoint slides, and it goes into more details in certain areas. So I think we should start kind of where all our academic conversations should start, with Destination 2020. And of course, you all know that Destination 2020 is comprehensive. It includes numerous initiatives, and most of those initiatives are going to be paid for with existing district funds. However, there are key priorities that will require significantly greater investments in order to accomplish. And those are early childhood, public school choice, and career and technical education. And so, to give you a little bit of background, a little historical context, and you all were here when this happened, I was not, so you probably know more than I do anyway, but just kind of to set the stage. So in spring of 2013, this board asked the administration to develop a comprehensive future programs and facilities plan. Then in December 2013, we had the Parsons report, which gave us a comprehensive facilities inventory and a condition assessment. And then just 2 months ago, Superintendent Miles outlined a very broad overview of the key academic priorities moving forward. And he also asked you all to name representatives to the Future Facilities Task Force. And this task force is going to help us review and revise the draft comprehensive plan, They're going to be able to provide recommendations for facility usage to support the programs that are actually outlined in the plan. And really, the task force is our tentacles into the community to help us gather deep input from stakeholders in each area of the district. So we've actually already had our first meeting of the Future Facilities Task Force. It happened on September 18th. I thought it went very well. Great group of people, very energetic about the road ahead, got some good feedback. And the task force is really operating under one main guiding principle, and that is that our students' academic needs and academic programs should drive the facilities planning. And that really we have to put the horse before the cart, if you will. We first have to outline what it will take to design a 21st century world-class education system, and then design facilities to actually meet those needs. And so the task force is ongoing, but in order for our programs to drive our facilities, we have to be really clear with you all about the programmatic components. And so this brief is designed to give you more programmatic details about the 3 initiatives that will most deeply impact future facility planning. And again, I've already talked about the 3. So without further ado, we'll get going on those programmatic details. And of course, I've already introduced everybody. We're going to start off with Alan Cohen, and then I'll take over on school choice, and then Linda will take over on career and technical education. So I'll turn it over to Alan, and he can talk you through an overview of early childhood education.
Great, thanks. Good afternoon, everybody. For the Destination 2020 Early Childhood Education Initiative, Dallas ISD's Early Childhood Education Strategy goal is to maximize the number of children who enter kindergarten ready to learn and excel. We'll work with local community to provide high-quality education experiences to children as young as birth in order to better prepare them. As part of this strategy, the district will provide pre-kindergarten to eligible 3- and 4-year-olds and set an anchor vision to collaborate with partner organizations to drive school readiness for children and their families from age 0 to 5. And we have a Destination 2020 goal of reaching 80% kindergarten readiness in the district. Just to give you some perspective as to how aggressive that goal is, currently today only 38% of our students are entering kindergarten ready and on track for success. Today, we will talk primarily about access and the part of early childhood that will most deeply impact the future facilities planning process. However, the Destination 2020 plan really focuses on 4 key areas for early childhood. The first is availability of quality early childhood seats. And what I mean by that is if all eligible 4-year-olds and a meaningful number of eligible 3-year-olds showed up on the first day of school, would there be a seat available for them? The second piece of this is we're going to have to go and convince families of the high value of an early childhood education so that they bring their children to fill those seats. So as one of my colleagues astutely told me, pre-K only works for the children who show up. The third piece of this plan is that we're going to place some big bets on instructional quality. We see a meaningful impact on students today by partaking in pre-K. However, not nearly the type of impact that we ought to see based off of the research and what we've seen in other communities. And the fourth is that we want to provide an anchor vision. This is not just a district initiative. This is a community-wide initiative to prepare our students for school. And we want to make sure that we are not only reinforcing the community effort, but leading a vision that allows the entire broader Dallas community to be able to align all of our resources to create the greatest wall of support for our children. As I talked about, even today we are seeing a significant impact on our kids if they attend pre-K. So a child that attends DISD pre-K will have approximately a 350% better chance of being kindergarten ready than a child that did not attend. And that is after basically taking all of the data of the children that attend, all of the data of the children that don't, and then regressing the data across all of our student level metrics. And really, regardless of demographics, socioeconomics, et cetera, we still see that 350% more likely to be kindergarten ready. And so all of our efforts to enroll more students have been meaningful to date, and we need more of that. But we know right now that there is a misalignment in terms of where the students are and where the seats are. And that misalignment is only going to become greater over time. So if we only focus on the current state, and what the problem is today, we'll really be focusing on the problem of yesterday. So what we want to do is take the best possible information we have and the best projections that we have in terms of population shifts that we expect to occur and plan for what we believe the future state of the district is going to look like. What we expect is that the population of 4-year-olds will not increase very much between now and 2018. What is expected to happen is that the population of 4-year-olds will redistribute around the district. And what we expect to see happen is that in the center of DISD, the population of 4-year-olds will decrease, while around the edges, the population will increase. And we want to make sure that we're prepared for that. And so this is the type of information that we'll be bringing to the Future Facilities Task Force to inform their planning process. And I will now pass it back to Mike for school choice.
Okay, so to get going on school choice, I think the first question to address is why public school choice? And I think as we seek to ensure that all kids graduate college and career readiness, public school choice can serve as a mechanism for growing the range of options so that all kids can attend a best fit school. Now, what do I mean by a best fit school? I mean a school that fits a student's particular interests, their aspirations for when they grow up, their learning styles, their circumstances, their values. And I mean, we know this intuitively, whether you're an educator or you're a parent. All kids are unique. They're all different. They have different ways of learning. They have different aspirations. And that's the joy of kids. And so why not tap into that individuality with our schools? And I would argue that if we can tap into that type of individuality, we can dramatically improve student achievement and student learning. And of course, we have choice in Dallas ISD today, and it typically manifests in the form of magnet schools. They're some of the best in the country, we know this. And part of the reason why they're so successful is because they tap into what makes kids tick. But the reality is that there are some inequities in our current system of choice, and we can make this better. And so I think the first thing to point out is that our magnet schools have academic entry requirements, which preclude many students from accessing them. And even for the kids that are academically qualified, the demand far exceeds capacity. So you can see on the slide there that 72% of applicants to the 20 most popular programs were either denied admission or were put on a wait list. I think there's a case that we need to expand choice options for kids, regardless of academic ability. And there's lots of choice options on the table right now. There's lots of things in the survey that you all have seen. And what comes to fruition is ultimately going to depend on community desires. And so you can look at the menu of options, if you will, on the right side of your screen. What comes out of this process is going to be what communities and schools and educators want. These will all be DISD public schools. Again, we've said this before, we're not talking about charters or vouchers or anything like that. These are going to be DISD public schools. And my office, the Office of Transformation and Innovation, is going to help expand these options over the next several years. And so, I think for me, at its most basic level, our plan is about two things. One, it's about the future. And so if you look at the list, you'll see that some of these schools can be cutting-edge schools of tomorrow, like personalized learning schools. But it's also a lot about equity. And so if you look at the list of schools on the right side of your screen, you see that there's options from top to bottom that would be extremely attractive for all types of kids. But there's an unfortunate reality here. When these schools manifest as public schools, there's often an academic entry requirement, which precludes students from accessing them. And when these schools manifest as private schools, kids are often priced out of the market. And so there is an opportunity gap in this country when it comes to schools of choice. And so when it comes to finding a best fit school for your child, and I would argue that all kids deserve these types of options, and I think it's pernicious to assume that only the high scoring kids can benefit from these sorts of options. I think all kids can benefit from these. And so this is about bringing choices and opportunities to families and students, particularly those families and students that maybe haven't had that many options in the past. So for me, this is about empowerment, and it's all voluntary, right? That's the essence of choice. And so I think that choice can be a game changer. It's essentially about bringing more magnet type schools to more kids. And our goal is that by 2020, we'll have created 35 new choice schools or programs. So our plan essentially contains 3 buckets of choice schools, and we'll have 3 separate competitive application processes for each type of bucket, and hopefully I can briefly walk you through what each bucket would mean. So the first bucket, as you saw, transformation schools. And so we have vacant school buildings that with some renovations could become schools again. We hopefully will have new building projects on the horizon over the coming years. And additionally, there's non-traditional space out there, like a co-location with a community college. And in these vacant, new, or non-traditional spaces, transformation schools will find a home. And essentially what we're talking about here are new, startup, open enrollment schools. And so our goal, as of right now, is that beginning in August of 2016, our goal is to have a total of 4 transformation schools that open, 1 in each of these geographic quadrants. And we think that this quadrant approach will help us reduce transportation costs and also allow buses to keep to existing tiers. The idea is that transformation schools will be open enrollment for students across the district, though transportation would only be provided within a particular geographic quadrant, again, to keep costs in control and also to keep to existing bell tiers. And so we're very committed to an equitable distribution of these schools across the district, and we're going to work closely with applicants to try to find a location that's beneficial for all. And my hope is that these transformation schools create instructional approaches and content and themes that are attractive to DISD families of all backgrounds. And no transformation school can introduce a test-in requirement. And we're very serious about equity of access to these schools, and we're gonna make sure that the accepted student pool is reflective of the initial applicant pool when it comes to things like gender and race, ethnicity, free and reduced price lunch status, geographic location. We're serious about equity of access, and my hope is that highly affluent families, middle-class families, low-income families will all be attracted to the options we provide, and that they'll apply to attend these schools no matter which neighborhood they live in. So the second bucket now we're calling innovation schools, this is designed for neighborhood schools that want to do their academics a little bit differently, but they want to stay in their existing facilities and keep their traditional attendance zones. And this innovation school pathway enables neighborhood schools to apply, to be heard, and to become a DISD choice school. Again, none of them will be able to introduce a test-in requirement. We want them to maintain their neighborhood identity. And so every kid within that traditional attendance boundary, if they wish, will have a seat at that innovation school. And then finally, the third bucket, pretty simple, expansion schools. We have some great options out there right now. There's a track record of success and they want to expand. We want to give them the opportunity to do that. So we'll consider proposals for expansion. And so that's pretty self-explanatory. So that's the third type of bucket. As I mentioned earlier, all of these choice schools will come out of a competitive proposal process. This is going to be a bottom-up effort. It's not going to be a top-down where we say this is going to go here, this is going to go here. We want this to bubble up. We want this to be a bottom-up effort. And I think the application process can be a manifestation of community desires, educator desires, family desires. As far as who can apply, existing DISD school leadership teams, proposed DISD school leadership teams, and we will have some broad guidelines on the teams, and those are included in the written reports as far as the licenses they need and certain requirements. And then following the application process for those that are successful, we're going to provide a lot of support to them. This isn't just a switch overnight. There's going to be a planning year that we fund, and my office, along with other district departments, are going to provide support, whether it's designing workshops or connecting them to local exemplars or national exemplars. We're very cognizant about the support that we provide to these schools so that when they do actually launch, it'll be successful. And then finally, I'd like to conclude by just saying that this is a living, breathing plan. It's going to change on input. It should change based on community input, and that's the reason why we have the Public School Choice Community Survey out there right now. We're trying to gauge levels of interest, and we're trying to figure out which communities are interested in which types of options. And so I think the results of this survey, not only are they going to help us, but they're going to help guide school leadership teams as they apply and submit their proposals. Essentially what we're trying to do is do a little bit of market research on behalf of the principals so that they can tell, okay, in my area, these couple options are very popular. And so we've blasted it out along many channels. We're continuing to blast it out, English versions, Spanish versions, electronically, paper, pencil. And I think it's a starting point for more engagement over the next couple months. And so that's all I'll say about the public school choice piece, and I'll turn it over to Linda. Oh, yeah.
one of the things that we do in career and technical education is work very closely with the workforce community. We work with the Dallas Regional Chamber, the North Texas Commission. We work with Workforce Solutions Greater Dallas, so that we work together, and we also work together with the higher ed community that oftentimes provides the training programs, the post-secondary training that is necessary for these fields. And this is the same chart that is used by all of those parties. So that as we're doing our planning in the district for career and technical programs, we are aiming toward our students being able to build a career ladder that allows them to climb toward a livable wage in Dallas County, where many of our students continue to reside. And we use these projections to make some decisions about the programs that we need to expand throughout the district and advise expansion of, because these provide more opportunities for our students to grow. And it's part of an entire system where we're looking at preparing students for the workforce, post-secondary education training just being a part of that. One of the things about House Bill 5, of which this is also part of the presentation, is that you all know that there are now 5 end-of-course exams that are part of some of the requirements that students need to work toward. And you all also approved as the default graduation plan the new distinguished, what we're calling the new distinguished plan that requires 26 credits and the building of an endorsement. So in addition to looking at workforce trends, we're also putting together the information that's required for this year's freshmen and beyond in order to earn endorsements that also allow them to step out onto that career ladder and move toward careers and living wages. And the new distinguished plan, just to remind you, does include Algebra 2 as a requirement, and it is the only plan that allows students to be eligible for Texas grant. Let's go on. The endorsement areas, in order for you to understand how the endorsements are tied to career and technical education, this chart here is by state law, the different kinds of endorsements, and you can see the career fields, the 16 different career clusters and different kinds of career fields that are associated with the endorsement plan. So endorsements, which are required by state law, and the career and technical planning that we do all have to be integrated together. Ninth graders this year, as you know, had to choose an endorsement. They have till the end of the year to do that. And then the following slides that Mike is going to go through just give you an example of the kinds of career and technical education programs that students are engaged in actually right now in the district at different high schools, and the different types of requirements that are required for House Bill 5. And we can just go through all of those. And the final 2 slides are the slides that show the programs at each of the high schools, the endorsements that can be earned, and then the career paths that are associated with those currently.
Okay. So just very quickly, as far as next steps, the next meeting of the Future Facilities Task Force is on October 21st. And really, we're going to spend fall trying to support the Future Facilities Task Force on the programmatic vision, on those academic needs. And they're going to help us get deep community input along the way. And then, of course, those long-term facility recommendations will ultimately be made by the Future Facilities Task Force. So that's it for our presentation.
Thank you to the administration for the proposal and the plan. Trustees, we're at about the 2-hour mark in accordance with policy BE local. Let's extend this conversation for at least another 45, 50 minutes for both this and then also the AP update. Trustee Morath.
Well, in the interest of time, ahead of time, as you gave everybody else the opportunity, thank you for that. It's an awesome plan. I'm looking forward to its implementation.
Trustee Cowan.
I'm very excited about rolling this out and having the conversations both here and in the community. I don't know if anybody else is interested, but I would be interested in the task force coming before the board and giving a presentation once y'all are done. And forgive me if I missed this or it's assumed, but the 3 buckets are those, what grade range is that?
It can be any.
Any. So that has not been determined.
I mean, it's open. I want to field proposals. I want to see what's out there. I want to see what's bubbling up. So we haven't put any grade restrictions on it.
And then the geographic quadrants, why only 4?
So we thought that would be kind of the happy medium to expand access, but also keep the transportation costs under control. And so if you make the quadrants too small, then it's basically just like a couple attendance zones, and you're not creating a huge quadrant for open enrollment. So we wanted to create a big enough quadrant for open enrollment, but also not make it too big to where kids are driving an hour and a half to school. So,
What led me to that question is including Pinkston in the blue area, just because there is a, not only distance, but drive time trying to get across the river to whether it be Palace or even up near Jefferson and White. So you might just reconsider or look at it again.
sir, and those are not set in stone. And actually, one of the questions we asked in the survey is, what's an acceptable ride time for your child? And we can adjust accordingly. So thank you.
I did fill out the survey as well.
Awesome.
Trustee Cohen? Trustee Nettle?
Question, when would the survey results be in?
So here's where we are right now. We just had like the first wave. We just had the first blast, and I just had demographics give us the results of let me restart. We have about 2,200 responses thus far, which is a pretty good start. That's a great start, I think. But we're just in our first wave. I got 150,000 leaflets sitting in my office right now ready to go out. And essentially what we've done is we've asked demographics to look at and geocode where are the survey responses coming from. And we see that certain locations it's heavier, and other locations it's not as heavy. It's actually pretty scattered. It's better than I thought it would be. But there's certain areas where it needs to, we need to saturate that area with face-to-face engagement, with leaflets, all those sorts of things. So we're gonna continue on a second wave. There might be a third wave, but my hope is that within about a month's time we would close out the survey. Does that make sense? Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
I would love to see.
I'm excited to see them as well.
On the current, it says magnet school admission among students admitted to the magnet program for this 2013-2014, 59% were Latino, 12% were white. But district-wide, we have 70% of students are Latino, which 59, that Latino 24%, 24% are black, which was 19 admitted. But they said that 5% are white, but there are 12% that were admitted into magnet schools.
Yeah, so I asked the question about this, and I think this might have been in the Moat Casey report, but I asked about this, and I think when they tallied up all those numbers, they didn't include other races and other ethnicities, so that's why it doesn't tally quite to 100%. They just looked at the three big groups, Latino, African American. But I think the reason it doesn't tally to 100% is because there's other races and ethnicities that weren't tallied.
So are we looking at from a opportunities? Then you said something about opportunity because you said current inequities, but you talk about race. But to me, 59% were Latino. We have 70%. So that's not way off the box, and then way out of the box. And 19% were black, and 24% of our district. So that's not.
Yeah, it's not.
So are we looking at, what are we looking at? Race or?
It's just we simply were pointing out that there's slight overrepresentation among certain groups and there's slight underrepresentation among certain groups. The numbers are not egregious, but there are trends in overrepresentation and underrepresentation.
The other question: can we have a makeup of just the demographics, African American, other white, just to look across? With like trustee district, like trustee 1, 2, 3, just kind of seeing the demographics by African American and trustee district. I'm just curious.
For magnet schools or for all?
No, just for how we look on it. Because looking at this demographics, I'm just trying to understand. When you say current inequities, so the breakdown, the survey results, and then on people wanting to submit. If the school is closed, how would a community group submit their choice for their community school?
So we would be fielding proposals from proposed leadership teams, and so it's actually it's in the written report, and basically what we've laid out in the written report, if I can find what I said so I can characterize it correctly. What we've said is that applying leadership teams can have somewhere between 3 and 5 people, a principal, an assistant principal, and an instructional coach, for instance. And a team must have at least one member who is a principal or a current or an assistant principal, and they have a valid administrative license. So essentially, we would be taking proposals from proposed leadership teams, and we're also going to require teams to have a proposed advisory board of community experts and subject matter experts so that they can shepherd them along the planning process.
So for a closed school, a community group could not come and present an option for that community?
Yeah, so they can team up with a proposed leadership team, like an actual school leadership team that would run the school. But we're certainly encouraging those sorts of partnerships.
But it's a closed school, so which leadership team would they team up with if the school is closed?
Right, they would be the proposed leadership team that we would ultimately.
Okay, so it's not a school leadership, it can be a community leadership team. So would they meet with you, or how did that process happen?
We're going to roll out a very open, competitive proposal process, and we're going to distribute it widely, and we're going to tell everybody that this is out there, and we're going to encourage folks, and we're going to do informational tours and meetings and all those sorts of things to make sure that everybody has heard about this opportunity, and encourage them to apply and explain the process.
So you're saying an open, competitive process. So if it's a community in South Dallas and it's a community group in South Dallas, so a North Dallas group can come together and say they want Fraser or whatever school, they can compete to open that school if they live in North Dallas?
So one of the things that we're going to ask is that proposed leadership teams have evidence of community buy-in, and I think it's very clear that folks that are in that community would actually be able to attain community buy-in for their proposals, and so we're going to pay a lot of attention to the amount of community buy-in that proposed teams have at the time of application.
Are we going to set guidelines, for example, because I'm just thinking, once again, a proposed North Dallas or people not living in the community want to open up Wheatley, and they compete for it, but then there's a community group in that neighborhood. So are we going to have guidelines of you must, I don't know, live or,
Yeah, we haven't put anything to paper. We haven't established any guidelines there, but I'm happy to have that conversation to see if that's something that actually makes sense. But as of right now, we haven't put any specific guidelines or rules on where you can live and where you can't live and all those sorts of things.
I was just, I just see the, transformation on how we're going to open up vacant schools. Coming together, fully open. So would that team make up determine how they want that school? What if they said they just wanted to service the South and Pleasant Grove area? Would they have to have open enrollment?
So yeah, so it would be open enrollment. Yeah, essentially it would be open enrollment. If for a transformation school, now an innovation school can keep its, it's an existing neighborhood school. It keeps its traditional attendance zone. It stays in its existing facility. So that's a neighborhood school that stays a neighborhood school. But when we're talking about the transformation school bucket, we are talking open enrollment. No, I appreciate the questions.
How that looks, and then how would
For just the quadrant or just for the whole district?
I don't.
So for the transformation schools, it would be open enrollment for the district, but we would only be able to provide transportation within a geographic quadrant.
Okay.
And I think that would capture most kids anyway, because there's probably not a lot of people that want to send their kid from the northwest to the southeast, right? So I think the quadrants are big enough to where most kids that want to go to these schools would have transportation.
Trustee Nutt also has the floor.
Yeah, I just one question. Trustee John, what's the law is it House Bill? HB5. How is this going to relate with?
Pathways.
Well, no, the not HB5. I know
You're thinking of SB2.
SB2.
In terms of the creation of open choice and
Yeah, open choice.
open
So how
enrollment
is that
choice
going to-
charter type
Have you looked into that?
district.
I have not looked into that. Does anybody? I'm not too familiar with that.
That's a particular opportunity for us that we really ought to brief you on separately, but this can be done, I don't want to say despite, but we're not really in the HB2 realm here. This is district charter, not, SB2. I'm sorry, SB2. We're not trying to create SB2 type schools. This is really district charter. So we'll bring back more information. It's SB2.
SB2 is in district charter. It's just a special kind of open choice.
Special kind
and
of open
enrollment,
choice.
And it was promoted this last legislative session.
Let us bring specific information.
Because we the board, they can come to the board now and we can do it. So I'm just trying to figure out the differences in that SB2. I couldn't remember. I was thinking HB5. Oh, the other question, graduation plan for Ms. Johnson. You said that I'm aware that with the graduation plan, you must take Algebra 2 in order to go to a state school. Do we know today how many students are on our
The new distinguished. So the freshman class is the only class that's been is required by law to choose an endorsement. And all the students were enrolled as a default in the new distinguished plan.
Prior to that, the 10th graders and the 11th graders, they got to pick a plan as well, too.
There's 3 other plans that are in place, a minimum plan, a recommended plan, and also a plan also called the distinguished plan.
We have 10th graders and 11th graders. How many are we? Because if you don't take that Algebra 2, it's our 9th graders that are automatic. But before this current class of 9th graders, how many sophomores, juniors do we have on that distinguished plan? Do we?
We'll have to get the numbers. We have quite a high number of kids on the recommended and distinguished plans, old plans now, sophomores, juniors, and seniors. Recommended and distinguished plans, we have quite a high number. We'll get you the numbers exactly because I don't remember them off the top of my head. But the other thing to remember about the old plans is you can go to a Texas university on either the recommended or the old distinguished. So
The current 10th graders up, 10th,
recommended,
11th, 12th.
recommended or old distinguished.
So the state schools will still accept if they don't take Algebra 2.
No,
Actually,
Algebra
that's
2 is required in the recommended plan.
But, so the question today, you have 10th graders that are in our schools that must go by that.
Recommended or the distinguished.
But if you do not take Algebra 2.
In the minimum plan. If you're on the minimum plan, you don't take Algebra 2. Right.
A recommended, the minimum plan, you cannot go to a state school. Well, you won't.
You won't have automatic option to do that.
The question, where's the data that's showing? Because we need to just prepare and make sure that we have all our students going forth, but how are we helping the 10th and 11th graders to make sure they get Algebra 2?
Man, we'll get the numbers for you.
Trustee Nuttall, Trustee Bingham?
Yeah, Linda, on the graduation plans, endorsement, are we giving our kids enough time, credits, where they can actually try out some of these different career things? I think that one of the options is, multiple endorsements, because it seems like they've got a pretty tight schedule. They might have, 1 credit where they can try something new?
Mm-hmm. They have, on the new distinguished plan, under the 26 credits, they have approximately 6 credits for electives. And depending on the endorsement that they choose, because some of those requirements are actually in the basic graduation plan, they're not just in the electives, those electives do give students an option to be able to try different things. And the reason being that, for instance, if you go a CTE path, most all the new endorsement plans are 4 credits for CTE. I'm not saying it's exclusive, it depends on the program, they're all different, but it's about 4. So if you had no classes that counted toward your graduation plan counting toward your endorsement, you have 6 credits to play with, and you can earn it with 4. So even if it's just in CTE, you have the option to try some different things.
But if I was a student, let's say I knew I was going to get industry certification, and would I have more credits to play around with? Because maybe I want to get industry certification and I want to be in the band or play sports.
Mm-hmm.
Could I go with the minimum graduation and get all that in? I mean, because the bottom line is we can say, well, you got to take algebra, this, that, and the other, but when you go into college, you still got to, for instance, if you're going into one of the community colleges, if you don't pass a certain standard on a test, regardless if you've had everything distinguished says, if you don't pass it, you still got to do remedial classes, right?
That's correct.
So if I'm a student and I went the minimum plan,
Mm-hmm.
and I went to, said, hey, I had a change of heart. I'm going to go to community college, and I passed the test. It didn't matter if I took those classes or not, would it?
Well, except for the fact that the TSI assessment, which is that test that's taken in the state of Texas, includes knowledge of Algebra 2 in order to pass it.
Right, but we all know there's online stuff that you can pick up just about anything you want nowadays. I'm just trying to think of a way that I think a lot of times that we guide students down the pathway like this, there's one pathway, and we're not showing them, and I talked about this earlier, there's a lot of different ways to get to a career. And some kids just aren't that academically oriented. They want to go with the hands-on stuff. I want to be a welder. And they can't see any need to do calculus or something like this. But are we preparing our counselors to steer the kids? Like, these are your different options. There's nothing wrong with those options. One option is not better than the other. It's just a different option. I just want to make sure that that's on the plate so that kids can experience that. And I don't think we're doing that right now.
And just this year, funds were allocated from Title I to create some new counseling positions, and a portion of that job is to start to provide career counseling. And I actually just learned this a couple of weeks ago, and we're putting together a training program for those counselors, because that is very different and much more complex than doing training for college acceptance.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, because I was at an orientation where the 5 endorsements were there, and there was a little student, 9th grader, and she chose a fine arts endorsement. And I said, well, are you in music, band? No. And so she wasn't in any of these. And I said, well, why did you choose that? And she was like, because I didn't understand what the counselor was talking about. So it's obvious there's a disconnect on what our counselors and what's being communicated to our students. So I'm glad to see that we're doing that. My other, to Mike, on this, I'm looking at the chart. It's the timeline for the transformation schools, the innovation schools, expansion schools. It has a yellow band across the top. It looks like applications are going to be due early winter, January of this year. Sometimes we don't know what we don't know. And I'm glad Bernadette brought up the fact that I'd kind of like to see how these surveys turned out, because I might look at the surveys, especially in a community, and say, you know, I never thought about that. And I think everybody ought to have an opportunity to see what the various ideas are, because somebody up in Elizabeth's district might come up with a dynamite idea, and I'm like, well, hey, I want to use that down in the southeast quadrant. So if somehow we can get that out there, we don't know what all is out there, and this is so new, and I'm a little concerned that we might be. And now I don't want you to slow down, okay? But sometimes it concerns me. Are we being a little bit too aggressive when we say we want that, January is going to be the rollout time? Because I can see a real disconnect in a neighborhood that is on top of this, and they really get in there and they get the great things going automatically. And I might be a year behind and not be able to get in on all the good stuff. So are y'all going to be kind of guiding? It's like, okay, Nancy, southeast quadrant, all y'all came up with was one thing. So can we help you out? Here's some more.
We are very committed to an equitable distribution of these options around the district, and if we see that there's lack of interest in certain areas, we're going to get more involved and say, hey, this process is out there, it's a really exciting thing, and try to really amp people up about it. And on your other point, I also 100% agree that the survey results need to be out there in plain view well before the applications are due. People need to see what's out there. People need to see, in this feeder pattern, people are really excited about this. In this feeder pattern, people are really excited about this, and it needs to be an open book. And hopefully when the survey closes out in about a month's time, we can have a quick turnaround and get those results out there so that folks can compare and contrast. Oh, gee, just down the road, they're interested in this. So that's very important. And then school leadership teams, when they're applying, when they're submitting and developing proposals with their communities, they can see, okay, in my area, these are the options. And so the whole idea behind the survey was that we do some market research on behalf of the community, and that they have this in hand at the time that they start to develop their proposals.
So here once again, I go back to my concern is that if the community sees the survey, let's say it's November at the earliest, but yet the applications have to be submitted, and it says early winter, which to me is January. Is that really going to give us
and I think too, we'll be flexible here. We're going to try to keep our ear to the community and see is this possible to do. I don't think the application itself is going to be terribly onerous. I think it's a seed idea essentially, and so I don't think that it'll be a 150-page document with every budget line item mapped out. I don't think that's what we'll be asking for. I think we'll be asking for a seed idea, and if we're getting feedback from the community to whoa, slow down, then we'll do that. I mean, I think that this is a living, breathing thing.
So are y'all going to have like a template or something where, okay, here's step 1, 2, 3. Hopefully it'll be a one-pager with no more than 5 steps.
Yes, it'll be very similar to the personalized learning competitive proposal process, which I wasn't here at the time, but my understanding is that it went fairly well. It wasn't a terribly onerous process for folks. They were able to complete it in a reasonable amount of time. And so we're going to model the application after the personalized learning stuff. And it's a template where you ask specific questions about what's your vision, what's your theory of action, what's your general plan. But it doesn't go into a terrible amount of detail. So I think it's possible to pull off. But if we're getting feedback otherwise, we'll adjust.
So if I needed a tutorial real quick, who would I go to so I don't take up more time? If I said, hey, show me what to do, would I go to Paula? Would I go to Mike? Would I go to Lynn?
So my office is going to manage the proposal process, and we actually have an individual who's coming on board next week. So and he'll be kind of the go-to person on that. But we're gonna manage the competitive application process, and we'll, on the application itself, if you have any questions, please contact this person. So I understand that this process it requires support and it demands support. My intention is to.
Okay, I'm going to put you on speed dial.
Please do.
Okay.
Anytime.
Thank you, Trustee Bingham. Dr. Blackburn.
Appreciate you guys coming out to Pinkston the other night, and looking forward to you being, where am I going next week? South of Cliff. Good. We're going to be on the road for the next month or so. But I think you saw from the other meeting at Pinkston, there's a lot of interest from parents and from the emails that we received as late as today. Let me take you to the page that's talking about the quadrants. And I'm going to ask you guys to think a little bit differently, because I'm reading in the middle where it says students that wish to attend a transformation school outside of their respective geographic quadrant will be able to do so, but they have to secure their own transportation. So if a student is at Pinkston and want to go to Sunset for that program, this statement says that they have to find their own transportation, yet a student from Carter can go up to Sunset, which is a further distance, and will not have to do so. So I'm going to ask you guys to think differently about that, and maybe put some kind of mileage criteria versus the geographic boundaries. And speaking of geographic boundaries, you have Wilma Hutchins in the same red group as Seagoville, Spruce, and Samuel. I will tell you that it will take a lot of transportation to go from the Wilma Hutchins area over to Seagoville. It's not as close as you might think it is.
And if Malloy Ridge Road is flooded, it's even.
That is true. You have to go far north and then come back down south. So on the map, you might want to think more along the line of some major highways, and the little squiggly line that goes from like northwest down to southeast. It's a major boundary, and it does not always have a lot of ways to get across it, unless we're going to have a ferry.
I appreciate that, and we'll definitely look into that.
Thank you, now.
Thank you, Dr. Blackburn. Trustee Jones. Dr. Jones and Trustee Jones.
Now, Lou knows what I'm talking about. That road floods.
Trustee Jones.
Thank you. Can somebody define equity for me? What does that mean?
Big question.
It is, but we're using that term fairly loosely here. And I think, having studied this district, Ms. Glassett's ad hoc committee spent a lot of time digging into the conditions across the geographies. So every single campus, what was their physical condition? Every single campus, what was their current utilization? Every single campus, what was their poverty rate? What were the other factors that we were looking at? And one of the things that came out of that wasn't just the situation of knowing the Parsons data, which is important, but also what we saw is there's a high degree of economic inequality across our district, and it is not evenly distributed, and it's not geographically predictable in terms of certain areas like you might find in other cities where one side of town is one way and the other side of town is another. In fact, one of the things we discovered was that the highest poverty high school, secondary school, comprehensive, is actually in my neck of the woods. It's Thomas Jefferson High School. So there's a lot of understanding I think this community would benefit from if we actually started to do some type of equity assessment and mapping. And that goes beyond, I think, some of the simpler requests that have been put forth here. That gets into a whole level of understanding. Property values is another big issue that are not evenly distributed across the district. And clearly those are your taxpayers and the people who ultimately support bond elections. We have entire neighborhoods that their economics are such that they send no children to our schools, even though we have schools in those neighborhoods that are full, and at times even in excess of their existing capacity. So the other equity thing I'm going to push back on, and this, I'm a broken record on this, because I grew up in a city that had equity in transportation. This city does not, or this actual entire geography, which is 16 cities for DISD, doesn't have equal access or equal opportunity. So I think it'll be incumbent upon not just the Future Facilities Task Force, but all of the hands on deck that will be looking at this, and I include this body in that discussion, to make sure we're all fairly clear about what our picture of the district currently looks like. And I'm talking about the 161,000 children we currently serve. Certainly, I would love to see growth in lots of areas. I know we all know the early childhood issue, and that one, stands on its own. But when you take the 161,000 kids we've already got, which, by the way, we grew pretty dramatically over the last few years, we got buildings across this district that are at 150% capacity, and it's been going on for 5 years or longer, that are in terrible physical condition, and we cannot ignore that. I would love to see choice, but choice is only possible if you can match it to a resource that supports it. And we all know that that becomes a trade-off between money and other things that go with that, the supportive resources. So that's something that, in my opinion, is missing from the current framework that is being looked at. Other districts around the United States have approached the equity and closed the achievement gap question by looking at an equity assessment. That's another tool or opportunity. We, on the Physical Assets Ad Hoc Committee, looked at educational adequacy, or started to, and we were promised that the district would undertake that study, which looks at not just how the building is utilized by way of how many kids are stuffed in there, but rather, does the building support the education delivery that we need it to be for 21st century readiness? That's another critical part. We've never done that district-wide, and that's another very important step in the totality of the things we need to know and understand in order to build a long-term plan that meets the needs of our current students and also of potential students. Because my guess is you're trying to increase demand too. Is that a fair statement? So you're not just looking at 161,000, what we serve today, but new growth, and I'd like to see an analysis of that. Because my understanding, when I looked at the demographic analysis, was that we have a market share, if you want to put it in those terms, that's almost in the high, like 90%, like 98% or some number. I mean, it's a real small population that we don't serve, who choose, let's say, other things, whether it's parochial education or education of other means like homeschooling or private schools or whatever you want to define as the universe. So I'd actually like to see a market analysis because it's also not evenly distributed in our district. Right now, we have a number of schools where the economic inequities are just startling to me. And that should be where you start the conversation, because that already exists in our district. It's not necessarily even in the magnets from what the analysis shows me. And geography does play a huge part in that, as well as the economic segregation that happens as a result of the way in which these areas have been built out. So I'm a big proponent of equity. To me, it is the ultimate issue that a public school district should focus on and be very mindful of addressing. But we have a lot of inequity in our existing system. So if we move to a new system or we open up new opportunity around equity, I'd like to make sure it starts with the folks the children we currently serve, and have a duty and an obligation to make sure they have what they need. I would say that the other things that we should be talking about, I know we're working on these things anyway, are academic needs and academic program design. This is a very important map for us because it's, you've got the primary education piece and then you've got the secondary. And the secondary is a very different set of strategies, obviously, especially around HB5, workforce readiness, all these things that you've got to be investing in early at the middle school level to support throughout the secondary experience. We've also got incredible inequity between our elementary and our middle and high schools as far as populations. We have almost a 1-to-1, I think, if I'm not mistaken. About half the kids are in your K-5 or pre-K-5 current roster. The other half of the 161 is all of your secondary taken together. So I'd really like to make sure, as we go down this path, you don't set an expectation that you otherwise can't fulfill, and that we have a clear understanding of what the real objective is, or the real end game is, for everybody's sake. I'm a big proponent of choice. I will be very proactive in supporting ways we can increase choice, but I think that we've got a lot of work to do in addressing the current inequities as a starting point, and be very clear about where they are, what they are, and how in the forward thinking plan they are addressed. And I look forward to the work. I believe it's bigger than one department and a few key people. I think it's going to take all of us, every single one of us, including the community, working together. And then the last piece, I spend a lot of time thinking about the finance part, or how we pay for things. So we're going to be looking at a lot of great ideas and a lot of great things we want to fund. The question is, what are we going to have the capacity to do and sustain, and make sure that it meets all of the key objectives. So that also has to be built in. So I, as I said, very, very much a proponent of making sure we build more choice in, but we've got to deal first and foremost with the children we currently serve, where we have a lot of inequity in the way they're served. Thank you.
Trustee Foreman.
It's difficult sitting on this end because I'm the one that gets called on last. But I'll try to go back and track some of this. I've got questions for each one of you. And I'll start with Linda. I was looking at the endorsements, and one that's particularly dear to my heart is the cultural studies. And do we have that opportunity for that endorsement currently?
Yes, we do.
And it's in which school?
We are in the process of analyzing that. The bill itself was 100 pages. The rules were 15 pages, and they track back to probably close to 60 pages of proposed coursework. And right now we are working to build a business analytics system that allows us to take all the rules and then take all the master courses at all the courses in the master course schedule at all the high schools, and then find all the combinations of endorsements. There are literally hundreds of combinations of endorsements. We hope to have that complete in about 2 weeks.
I'm just interested, the question I asked about was cultural studies.
Right.
And so currently we do not, but
No.
we are looking at.
We actually do have it because of the courses that can satisfy the endorsement, but I can't tell you what school's at yet, but I will be able to in about 2 weeks.
So I'd like to know.
Okay.
Because I think that's a great opportunity for many of our kids. And so in my mind, I'm still thinking we don't have that together yet. So that's just one area. Alma, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm great. Could you go to page 10 for me? I'm a little slow on graphs. So I'm trying to understand both of these graphs that you have on here. Can you just kind of walk me through that? Page 10.
Yeah, so, sure. So basically what we did was we have our data right now, while we cannot tell when a child shows up at kindergarten, whether they attended Head Start or whether their parents sent them to no child care, but we do know if they went to DISD pre-K or not. Right. So what we have are two sets of children. The children that went to DISD pre-K and then progressed to kindergarten in the district, and the kids that did not attend DISD pre-K and then progressed to kindergarten in the district. And then what we have is for each of those children, we have all of their student level data. So, we know their demographic background. We know whether they were their linguistic background. We know whether they were a special ed student, et cetera. And it may be less than artful language, but a lot of times in early childhood, we talk about those as risk factors. And so what this does is it takes each individual student level vertical or each individual risk factor, and then it regresses all of that information so that we can say for a child what is the likelihood of breaking out each of those factors. What does that impact their likelihood of being kindergarten ready?
Okay, so when you say DISD pre-K 347, what does that mean?
Sorry, what you're looking at?
I'm looking at the left.
Yes, it means that that overall a child was 347% more likely to be kindergarten ready by virtue of having attended DISD.
Okay, so when you have the negative 23 going the other way for African Americans, and I guess that's versus Hispanics, what is that?
Yes. So what you do in terms of when we run this statistical regression, what we try to do is what is the most common combination of student attributes. And so one of the most common attributes is being Hispanic. We have more Hispanic children than we have of any other. And so then we're going to compare what is the likelihood that compared to that base child, if a child is African American, what does that do to their just statistical likelihood in the current state right now with the information we have? And that would be a slightly negative impact.
I'm still struggling.
Sure.
In the current state.
Yes.
Right now.
That's in the current state.
Negative 23 would mean that their opportunity to get through pre-K is...
No, it means that DISD has impacted their likelihood of being kindergarten ready less than we were able to impact the likelihood of being kindergarten ready.
Okay, so that means that the opportunities for African Americans have not been as great. Is that what that means? Or because I see the left students here too, so I'm just trying to get a feel for what that actually means.
It means that I think it raises more questions than it gives us answers. So I honestly.
And the second chart, because that really didn't get me where I was going, but the second chart. Can you just kind of break that down for me?
Sure. So when you take all of these individual student level verticals, right? And then you roll them back up, and you then only cut across race, and we're looking at, white, Hispanic, and African American. Then what we see is that we have a very tight window in terms of the overall likelihood when we look at all of our students. So it ranges from 300 and I guess 45% more likely to be kindergarten ready for the African American student, to 347% more likely to be kindergarten ready for the Hispanic student, to 350% more likely to be kindergarten ready for the white student. I think what this is largely illustrating is that there is no one individual factor, as we all talk about why the effects of poverty matter. Not that poverty is one singular thing, but that there are many, many characteristics and many circumstances that our children grow up in. And so what all of that combination creates an effect that we call multicollinearity. And what this tries to do is break down some of those multicollinear effects so that we can better target interventions.
So basically what this is this is the percentage of probability of each race being pre-K ready. And it's
No. So let me try to put this into a different
in
metaphor.
layman's terms for me.
Sure. So, for example, I coach a youth basketball team, or I used to coach a youth basketball team. Okay, the chances that any of those folks will make the NBA is incredibly slim. So, right. So, but by virtue of playing youth basketball, the likelihood that they would make the NBA is increased. Does that make sense?
The projections. What numbers do we use to get these projections, and where do these numbers come from?
So you're talking about the next slide?
Either one of these two.
So this is just based off of the current student level data of our kindergarten class, or last year's kindergarten class.
All right. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Michael, I have several questions for you. One of them is that, I think it's on the next slide, it talks about access deficit will increase in the perimeter areas. So are we saying that, are those perimeter areas outside of the DISD, or are we talking about inside of the DISD?
This is the early childhood piece, and so I would defer to Alan on that piece.
So this, what we're saying is within DISD's boundaries, we believe that the population will be shifting more towards the outer boundary of DISD. Now, we could expand this analysis a little bit to see how much population may be going beyond the outer boundaries, but this is just focused, or the only data that we have captured here is within DISD's boundaries.
I would caution us, because we have 16 cities, that we make sure that we're talking about the DISD boundary, and that's why I raised that. Because if you go to Carrollton Farmers Branch and you're using all the numbers there, that's not going to be reflective of our district. And so I would just caution us to be extremely careful as we do that. Okay, then Michael, now I can ask you. One of the things that concerns me is serving on the bond committee since 2002. I know it probably cost about $30 million to build a school.
Elementary.
And so
50 for a middle and close to 80 for a high school.
But what I'm trying to say is that there's a severe cost in talking about building new schools. And one of the things I know best and campaigned on was that we were going to do what we needed to do to fix our community schools. And so this program becomes very aggressive in terms of what will happen to a capital project plan, which would be a bond plan. It could be very, very costly, and some of this is all on an assumption because we don't know, and that troubles me. But I'm for choice, so don't get me wrong about that. But I'm more for choice in our existing neighborhood schools and making those schools better. So when we talk about innovative schools, if a community wants to change or bring in new programs to an innovative school, and maybe several new programs, does that mean that the staff would then change and would have to reapply, or is that just for transformation schools?
Yes, ma'am. That's a great question. I'm glad you asked that. That's one of the slides we didn't talk about. But essentially, the way we're envisioning it right now is that for transformation schools, those would be new startup schools in a new building or a vacant building, and so there is no existing staff. And so obviously, the leadership team there would have the ability to hire staff. For innovation schools, those are the existing neighborhood schools that change their academics a little bit differently, but they stay in their existing facility. They keep their traditional attendance zones. They will have existing staff, and we would handle it very similarly to the way we did the personalized learning schools, where they repurposed their instructional approach, and it was basically a voluntary opt-in. And what we saw from personalized learning schools is that given the opportunity for professional development and training, very few of those teachers opted out. And so it would be completely voluntary on behalf of the staff that if they want to do the repurposed programming, they can do that. And as long as there's a planning year, there's training that goes along with it, it's an exciting thing to do. We think that there won't be many folks that opt out, but if they do opt out, we create opportunities for them to go somewhere else. So this isn't designed to replace staff or anything like that.
I just asked that question because I want to make sure it's clear that
that
if
question.
new programs come in, that the staff will not be replaced. And we're only talking about that for transformation schools. Because I have a school in my district also that will probably end up being one of those transformation schools, Superintendent Miles. Because I'm very interested in reopening that particular school in the best way that I possibly can. So I look forward to seeing you guys at Carter on the 27th to talk about this.
And I just want to say, this is about empowering neighborhood schools. And so, we're not trying to change neighborhood identities. We want to empower them.
Trustee Foreman. Mr. Kaprowski. First basic question is the survey in Spanish?
Yes, it is.
So tell me where that is, and then how are we actually getting that information out to
So
Spanish
we're
speakers?
blasting it out in a lot of different ways. The first main thing is that it's on the homepage. If you can find it on the homepage, and it takes you to a link. We've blasted it out to the board. We've blasted it out to the Future Facilities Task Force. We've sent it to chambers, and it's an email blurb that says, here's the English link, here's the Spanish link. And then we're also printing off copies of it as well. So we have surveys that are going out through our parent engagement office. There'll be printed copies. And we also have 150,000 leaflets, as I said, sitting in boxes in my office. Front of it's English, back of it's Spanish. It says the same exact thing. It takes you to a differentiated link. So
Go ahead, Trustee Gillen.
It took me about 15 minutes to find it in Spanish, but I can find it in 1 second in English because I click on the link and it goes to the English part. Can we just put a link to the Spanish survey on the main homepage? And also on the Spanish site, you've got to go up to the scrolling header. There's not a big banner in Spanish on the front page like there is on the English site.
we can
Thanks.
take care of that. Just so you all know that there's a fair amount of comparability between the number of responses that we've gotten from the Spanish link and the English link. There's more on the English link, but it's pretty close as far as the comparison. So we're happy with the way it's gone thus far.
So second question, and this will lead me to my third question, is building off of something Trustee Nuttall mentioned earlier. For those communities who a few years ago did have schools and to date don't have schools, although the actual facilities are still there, what type of outreach are we doing to particularly to those particular communities? I mean, I can understand maybe we pass the flyers out to some of the students, and they're going to go back to their communities. But for other community members there who may not have children, particularly in Dallas ISD at this moment, what's our outreach plan for those individuals?
Yeah, so our plan is to roll out the competitive application and then do kind of an informational tour, particularly areas that have lots of vacant buildings. There's sort of concentrations of vacant buildings in areas of the district, and so particularly in those areas we want to do kind of face-to-face engagement, informational tours, and get people really excited about the possibility of submitting a proposal.
So this gets me, not to rehash the equity conversation, but when I think about where this actual conversation started around school choice and early childhood education, you have to go about a year back. And a lot of the conversation initially started with vacant facilities and what we can do to ensure that those communities are empowered and have an opportunity to be able to reinvest in Dallas ISD after having that happen to them. So when I think about those particular campuses and this idea of a leadership team that's placed together, I'm not suggesting that we have some sort of weight applied to those communities, but what I am suggesting is that we try to the absolute best to reach out to those individuals, and particularly those communities who, if their kids are not in the schools and they are not a part of the actual conversation with the ISD today, though still have a vested interest, that community team, if that community team does exist, knows the process through and through. You heard from speakers today from Arlington Park. You've heard from speakers in the past from multiple schools, Thompson, and they have their own plans, and they've been working on that for quite some time. So I think it'd be very wise to just ensure that those groups that had already begun that process on their own are included in the process.
Absolutely.
That's it. I know Trustee Jones had one more question, and then we'll.
I had kind of two questions that are sort of the same dynamic. If you open enrollment district-wide, then aren't we undermining our feeder pattern structures in some way?
So there's going to be a set number of open enrollment schools, and in August of 2016, our goal would be one in each of these geographic quadrants. And so, are you saying that they would peel kids away?
Well, that's the question. I mean, that's really the issue you've got to wrestle with. You don't want to sort of undermine your own systems. And to a certain extent, magnets already have a little bit of that effect just because we don't have even distribution of magnets geographically. So those that can get there do, but those that can't.
I think open enrollment schools will be attractive to many, many people, but I also think that neighborhood schools have an advantage in the sense that they have the opportunity to apply and exercise the same choice autonomies as the open enrollment schools. And so I think parents have an affinity to their neighborhood schools and want to send their kids to a good neighborhood school. And if those schools have the opportunity to apply and do the same things as the open enrollment schools, I think that they can make it happen.
No question. I mean, to me, the neighborhood school is the ultimate goal because that's how you build community. Those two things literally reinforce. But we've got areas of town where economically the area is gone. I mean, essentially, there's no investment, there's no resource support, populations continue to dwindle. It's an economic development downward spiral. We're in the school business. We can't drive economics, but obviously a good school can potentially bring it as long as you're drawing from within the community and not elsewhere. So, as I was thinking about this, I said, well, if you open enrollment to be without geographic limit, then how do you make sure to optimize the neighborhood part? So that's one key concern. The second is also this issue that I think Trustee Foreman touched on, and it's near and dear to my heart because in the Northwest Quadrant, we touch 3 other cities. We're in 3 cities. We have actually DISD schools in 3 different cities. The growth that's happening is in and around those cities, and it's tremendous growth, as we already have learned. There's even some new economic development going on with the Midtown project. So there'll be a need for a new school there anyway. And we've got not just that area, but lots of areas in and around DISD where growth is happening, but other areas where growth is really our challenge. I love the idea of going back to schools that were closed. But the sad reality is a lot of those are in areas where the population wasn't there. And in other instances, the economics of trying to support that couldn't be justified. Or at least that's the way this body came to that determination in 2011, which I was not a part of. But I do think it's critical that we just not look at the plans that may come out, but rather being purposeful in focusing in areas where we can truly create the opportunity by design. And I'm particularly sensitive to the point where we got areas like with Trustee Foreman and myself. Carrollton Farmers Branch ISD, good example. They're open enrollment. They take kids from our district. Some of our surrounding districts, like Grand Prairie ISD, which, by the way, there's a large part, is also open enrollment. So we're also competing against that, too. And early childhood may have different principles of where people want schools, simply because sometimes they want to have them in areas where they work, not necessarily where they live. And they're also going to look at quality. And that's the other issue that we're going to be up against. You can't scale early childhood quality easily. That's not something we can do organically. That's something we're going to have to partner and look at other mechanisms to make sure we've got the available resources to be able to meet the need. The schools, same argument. We can't do this alone. So I would also challenge the thinking to look at partnerships and other strategies, not just our own. And the last point, and I do need to underscore this, buildings are not schools. Schools are living, breathing, cultural, centers of where communities and children come together. Schools are where education happens. Buildings are just physical structures. The physical structure obviously should meet the need of the child. And I think we all would agree that right now, some of our empty buildings were left to be vandalized and otherwise in their current state, and given the investment we may need to make because of the vandalization, may not be economically viable. So that's another area that all this should be part of our fact base, our understanding, and how we do this really important and very critical thinking for our future and for our children's sake.
I think if I could just say one thing, I wholeheartedly agree with your point about taking a partnership approach. And I think if you look at cities that have really tackled the equity issue with success, they've taken an interagency approach, where it's the school district, it's housing, it's neighborhood development, it's health, it's transportation. And I think that that's an important thing to keep in mind. And we're actually, I think we're on the schedule to brief the Joint Education Task Force, I think, in a couple weeks. And so we want to have those conversations with all of these other entities too, because you're right. If we're going to tackle that equity issue, it has to be an interagency approach. So I agree with you.
Thank you all to the administration for the work that you've done on this. This has been a tremendous lift. I know you have done a critical thing, and that is listen. You've sought out opinions, you're listening, and you're going to continue to listen. So we appreciate that. Thank you all for the work that you've done. We're now on to our last presentation, E, Advanced Placement Update. Superintendent Miles.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. Smisco and Linda Johnson will be giving a short update on advanced placement.
Thank you very much.